So what we want to do is cultivate a capacity for kindness. So, close your eyes. Take a few moments to breathe in and breathe out. So what we want to do is cultivate a capacity for kindness. So, close your eyes. Take a few moments to breathe in and breathe out. Alrighty, chat. Let's get started. How y'all doing today? Welcome everybody to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Alo Kanoja. A reminder that although I'm a psychiatrist, nothing we discuss on stream today is intended to be taken as medical advice. Everything is just for educational and entertainment purposes only. So yeah, if y'all have a concern or question, please go see a licensed professional. So ADHD in relationships is the subtitle of my life. Yeah, we're going to dive into that. So a lot of like really important stuff to talk about today. And I'm actually really excited to talk about these things because they're very, very relevant to our community. They're very relevant to like what people deal with. And I also think that what I really like about some of the questions that we get is that they're like pretty insightful. And I haven't really heard them asked a whole lot of other places. And I think that's really important because these are things that I think affect a lot of people. So the thing that I'm kind of thinking about is we're going to talk a little bit about whether childhood is the best time of your life. Because we all say that like childhood is the best time of our life, right? Like we're kind of like, oh yeah, you know, my childhood was great. I did this was fantastic. Like all this stuff was awesome. But like, what if your childhood wasn't great? Does that mean that basically, so like let's just think about this for a second. We'll go into a lot more detail, but you know, if we say that childhood is the best time of your life and we kind of agree as a society that that's the case, and then like your childhood sucked, does that mean that you've just missed, like you're never going to have, so if childhood is the best part of your life and your childhood was not fantastic, does that mean that the capacity for happiness in your life is just like lower? Right? Because if this is the sweetest part of life and I don't get that, does that mean that my life is like necessarily better? Because that's what you would logically conclude, right? Because there's a lot of stuff that we do societally that we don't really like think about in terms of like how we frame things, how we set expectations. We also don't really recognize that people have different experiences. And so there's a lot of stuff here that I really appreciate our community for being thoughtful and like critical about some of these core assumptions and beliefs. There's also another really great post we're going to be talking about today about dating. So I don't know if y'all have seen like, you know, relationship related content on the internet, but it isn't like optimistic, right? You know, it's like most of the people who talk about things on the internet relating to dating, it's like got a very negative cast to it. And so then the question becomes, is everyone struggling or like what's going on here? Like, how do we understand this? And so I saw a really fantastic question asked. Someone was like, so Dr. K talks about relationships and like communication and working on yourself. Does any of that crap actually work? Like, has this actually worked for anyone? Which is a really good question, right? That's like, because there's just an assumption. Everyone's out there, myself included, giving advice. We're like, oh, like you should do this. Like, believe in yourself, man. Like, it's all within you. Like, oh my God. Like, we've seen that with our interviews with people, you know, that we've done who are struggling to date and stuff like that. We've talked about relationship advice. And here I am, like, telling people all the time, like, you know, oh, like this is what you should do. This is what you should do. This is what you should do. We try not to give advice. We really try to sort of help people understand things so that they can choose what to do. But like, does any of that crap actually work? And so we're going to talk about that today. So we've got a lot of like fantastic questions. And I really appreciate where people are cognitively when they ask these questions, right? It's not necessarily that people are like, oh my God, like life sucks and there's no hope. It's like people are genuinely wondering. Okay, so like if my childhood sucked, what does that mean for the total amount of happiness in my life? It's fine to like talk about working on yourself and figuring out, you know, how to be more effective at dating and things like that. But like, does that stuff actually work? So I really appreciate the critical nature of these questions because by sort of exploring these things in a nuanced and critical way, we'll really discover what works and kind of what doesn't and like a lot of other stuff. Couple of other things. So we were out on Monday, which was actually really fantastic. We were actually at the Youth Mental Health Summit in LA, which was an awesome event put on by the California Endowment. Some of y'all may have been following stuff on socials and things like that. But, you know, it's really interesting because mental health is in crisis. And I'm actually like pretty optimistic about it for the first time. Like, we started streaming 3 years ago or 2 years ago, something like that. And I felt like it was sort of like just us trying to fix this problem. But what I've been really, really amazed by is that how many people are taking this seriously. So I think part of the reason that mental health has gotten so bad, not only in the United States, but across the world, is that for a lot of times, like for a long time, people have been taking it for granted. It's not like an active thing that we were advocating for, fighting for, trying to understand, putting research money behind. We just sort of like let it happen, right? And especially in terms of technology, where it's sort of like, there are a lot of technological platforms that are trying to grow and be successful, and what they're sort of fighting over is your attention. And we've sort of just like let all this stuff kind of like happen. And we haven't really focused on it. And I haven't heard people talking about it. I remember talking with some colleagues at the American Psychiatric Association 2 years ago and talking to them about video game addiction and technology addiction. And they were like, well, we're like busy with opiates right now because opiates are killing people in this country, which is like a fair concern, right? The opiate crisis is still really bad. So it sort of makes sense that we were focusing on that. Like then we were focusing on COVID as a planet. And now I really feel like for the first time, we're taking mental health very, very seriously. It's really awesome to hear the Surgeon General speak and sort of like talk to their team and things like that about like what's actually being done. And I'm really, really hopeful that, hopefully this will like get better, because it seems like people are taking it very, very seriously, and people at all levels of I don't know, society. I don't know how else to put it. So we were at the American Psychiatric Association conference. Same people that I talked to about 2 years ago that were like, oh, we don't, we're busy with other things. There were like 5 or 6 different presentations about, like video game and technology related stuff. We were also, the reason we were there is we were presenting our findings about our coaching program and its efficacy. So it's really awesome that like the APA is like interested in that, right? That they're like, cool, like, why don't you come and show us and show people what y'all have done? So I think it's really awesome that way. So like academically and research wise, I think we're starting to see more of a focus on it. Obviously the Surgeon General is focusing heavily on it in terms of like policy initiatives. We also spent a lot of time with like different nonprofits and different kind of like on the ground groups. So it seems like it's happening sort of at the national level, international level. We've spent some time working with the UN and the WHO. And so like people are taking it seriously. So if y'all are despairing, like just hold out. I think good stuff is coming down the pipeline. We're obviously going to continue to do our work, and we're growing and stuff like that. We recently, we've sort of certified about 20 to 25 more coaches. So our coaching program has been full now for like 18 months. And for those of y'all that have been on the waiting list for a long, long time, we really apologize. We're really like, trying to get coaches in a good place as quickly as we can, and we're just kind of capped. There are actually spots now for the first time in a while. So if you guys are interested in coaching, we'll talk a little bit more about how that's helpful and stuff like that. But like, this is where it's really interesting, because organizations like in the winter of 2021, the Surgeon General released a report on youth mental health. And a big part of what everyone is sort of recommending is peer support services. And that's what our coaching program is. It's not a licensed or trained therapist. It's someone who understands your situation and like what it's like to grow up in this world and understands memes, understands your language. And it turns out that, like when people look at peer support services, they're effective. So they can help people. And what I really like about our coaching program, and part of the reason that we went the coaching route as opposed to the therapy route, is that, therapy is really about clinical diagnosis. And what I really think people need more of is like these questions that people are asking. Like, okay, does working on myself actually work in terms of getting a girlfriend? How do I build a life that's worth living? And what I sort of think of, so I'm, as a psychiatrist, what I usually do is focus on things that are broken. Like that's what the medical model is about. It's about focusing on things that are broken. You don't go see an orthopedic surgeon to get in shape. You go see an orthopedic surgeon if you have like a broken hip, right? Or you need a knee replacement. That's the role of clinical medicine, is to fix things that are broken. But how do you build something that's good? Like, how do you get into shape? How do you develop confidence in yourself? How do you climb to the top of Mount Everest? That's not something that a medical doctor is going to help you with. That's where you need something like a personal trainer. And I think what we've seen for far too long in our society is that there are no personal trainers for the mind. And so what we do with our coaching program is like, what I sort of realize is that we understand clinical stuff really well. We understand things like bipolar disorder and stuff like that. We understand that stuff. What we don't really understand is a society is like, how do you help someone get motivated? How do you help someone build a life that's worth living? And that's sort of why we did coaching, because I think those are the things that we haven't focused on, right? Like there aren't, if you go and you become a therapist, you're not going to you'll get a whole month of training on bipolar disorder, 3 months, 6 months. You'll work on inpatient units, you'll see outpatients, you'll work with these people who have anxiety and phobias and trauma and stuff like that. All super important stuff. But you're not going to learn, okay, like how do I help someone like get motivated? How do I actually help someone find a job? How do I help someone get promoted? How do I help someone find a relationship? Some of that stuff you'll see in therapy. But what we really focus on in coaching, and what I think is really lacking, is like, as the world has changed, the old formulas for succeeding in life no longer work. And so what we need is an individual approach that's like relatively personalized, in which you can understand yourself, understand your tools, understand your strengths, understand your weaknesses, and develop a plan going forward to like build a life that you want to live. Because the old formula of go get a college degree and then you can support an entire family of 4 people off of a bachelor's degree and the subsequent work is like, it's not working anymore, right? Like relationships, you don't just meet people, you don't marry your high school sweetheart and then like, that's it, you're done and you live happily ever after. The world is becoming more complicated. We have way more choices. We have way more pressures, financial pressures, social pressures. Technology is screwing with our heads. And so like, it's harder to just succeed. And so that's where, our focus is in helping people succeed as opposed to fixing things that are broken. Anyway. Inflation. Save us, Dr. K. Okay, I don't know if I can do that, but we're going to try. So let's get started. Okay, so let's do quick poll. Uh-oh. All right, so we've got 4 things to cover today, okay? Oh my God. Twitch.tv. Oh no, GG. Okay. All right, so I guess I'll just pick. Let's start with ADHD, chat. Okay. Let's go. All right. So ADHD / second time being kicked out by partners to find motivation. Am I a magnet to these situations? What can I do? My ex kicked me out 3 separate times, saying I need to find my independence, and often joked that I was mooching. There was quite an age gap. I was 17 and they were 25, but I was working full-time and contributing to the house and cleaning regularly. He also mentioned he felt he wasn't good enough for me. He would also say to me, if you don't have anything good to say, you shouldn't say it at all. And maybe that had something to do with how ADHD gets me overwhelmed easily and contributes to my depression. I had a lot of difficulty putting my thoughts into words, but with him it was easy because he would basically read my mind. I liked how he truly understood the great ideas my ADHD brain had. However, he kicked me out but still wanted to stay in a relationship with him, but I couldn't handle the back and forth of moving in and out with him, so I set boundaries and eventually broke it off. Good for you. I currently have a partner who I believe is more grounded and compassionate. However, they also want me to move out and stay in a relationship with them because they feel like it's what's best for both of us. This time around, I've practiced self-awareness and setting boundaries. I didn't have a job because we were going to renovate a house after moving together across the country. He says that in 8 months, I haven't done enough renovating or cleaning. The house has very little storage and I've been very overwhelmed, ADHD, and too much of a perfectionist, OCD. I did not come up with the proper plan or get enough done. He's seen me renovate in the past, has seen me do great work. He says he doesn't feel like I'm the same person. He also mentioned he doesn't like my tone when I ask him simple questions and thinks I'm frustrated and passive-aggressive which I am not, but I still want to try to use a better tone of voice. He also told me if you don't have anything nice to say, then don't say it at all. I don't quite understand how this line haunts me because I rarely speak without thinking anymore, but at times I have difficulty putting thoughts into words for him, and sometimes it comes out wrong, but that's another story. I don't know if it's another story, right? That may be related. Even though I feel healthier with this partner, I often feel like my great ideas aren't well understood, but it's something I can live with. The trauma from being kicked out in my first relationship really stresses me now. I found a job already, but I still need to find a place to live out here alone with no family or support system in hopes that it'll help me and my current partner. This situation has triggered my depression. I can totally understand that, right? Like, move to a new place, living on your own, kind of move to this place presumably to be with this person. We will get couples counseling, and my hopes are that he will understand me better by the end of it. I need him to understand what he needs from me is causing me suffering, and I don't feel that adding on rent to my bills will help us. But I do believe that communicating, therapy, and coming up with a good plan to continue working on the house will help us both. But he disagrees and says it's too late for me to keep working on the house, and no matter what I do, I definitely still need to find a place to live for 6 months to 1 year or so. I just can't help but wonder if I'm the magnet for this kind of situation. I don't understand how this is happening to me for the second time. I feel like I've lost my trust in him as I can't count on him anymore. I'm already broke from having him drag me across the country and spending all my savings due to my poor trip planning. Is he right to kick me out? Does anyone know what I can do to save this relationship? So this is like super challenging. Okay, let's like try to understand what's going on here. So the first thing is that ADHD has an intersectional relationship with relationships. So this is where we've got to take a step back and really understand like what's going on here. So like we think about using the medical model, right? We sort of think about a disease as an isolated thing, and that disease causes particular problems. And we sort of think about treating that disease in isolation. Like if I'm ADHD and I get on ADHD treatment, it's sort of fixed and I'm set. The problem with ADHD is that it's very, very intersectional and dominating in terms of shaping our life. So it's not just that this person has, for example, a difficulty with getting overwhelmed easily, or maybe it's not easily. Maybe they don't get overwhelmed easily. It's like renovating a house is like not a small project, right? So this person has moved across the country. They're like responsible for renovating a house, which is very, very challenging in and of itself. Like even if you don't have ADHD, that's like a lot of work. And then as we're sort of working through this stuff, like you've spent 8 months and he feels like you haven't done enough. And so like, is that the ADHD? Well, then that intersects with the relationship. So what we tend to see with a lot of people is that not only do people with ADHD sometimes struggle with prioritization and organization, but those struggles intersect with the relationship. And so because like our partners have particular expectations on us, they may not really be understanding what we struggle with or may not kind of give us allowances for it. Then we run into relationship problems. And then what happens is we have like communication difficulties, which is a big part of ADHD as well. So a lot of, if you kind of think about it, if you zone out in conversations, for example, if you have difficulty like formulating your thoughts in a coherent way because they're all over the place, that then negatively impacts the relationship. So now what we've got is a situation where there's a problem that needs to be fixed in a relationship, right? Maybe you're not renovating as much as you have or you need to or your partner wants to. But then generally speaking, like what's our antidote to that problem? The problem, like it's one thing for ADHD to kind of make it difficult for us in terms of organizing our life, prioritizing our life. But then like on top of that, when that doesn't work out, we rely on things like communication to fix things, right? Okay, let's get on the same page. Let's figure this out. Let's work through it. But if your communication is hampered, and we sort of see evidence of that, right? So people are multiple times they're complaining of like, tone and stuff like that. So we've had a couple of partners who do that. We are also seeing that this person sort of struggles to get thoughts out of their head sometimes, which is very common. And so that negatively impacts the relationship. And then suddenly, the thing that was supposed to be an antidote, our backup plan, our safety net, our parachute, stops working. Not only does it stop working, it adds additional weight and additional stress. And then as we get into negative situations, right, you kind of get, then you get kicked out, you come back, you get kicked out, you come back, you get kicked out, and you're like, enough is enough. Then you get traumatized by it. So on top of everything that's happened, and we sort of understand this, we'll go into more detail, then you sort of like lose trust. Like, you know, then the cycle starts repeating itself, and you feel like you're a puppet whose strings are being pulled. And then what you have to do is like deal with sort of the triggering and trauma from all of the above. So what happens in ADHD is that we get this like weird stacking effect, right? It's the first thing is that my brain doesn't really like organize very easily, or sometimes I bite off more than I can chew. And this is the other thing about ADHD is that there are times where you know you're capable. And we sort of see this in this case as well, where there are bursts of like creativity and productivity that are amazing. Why did you sign up to renovate the house? Why was your partner okay with you renovating the house? Because they've seen what you're capable of. And with the previous partner, they were able to see the brilliance of what your brain can put together. So this is the challenge, is that it's like, it's not all bad, right? They're like these moments of brilliance, moments of productivity. And then what we do is we start to build a life expecting those kinds of moments, and things don't really work out well because we don't really know how to foster and create those moments. And then the communication falls apart. And then like you start to get traumatized a little bit because this has happened before. We've been here before. Now what do we do about it? And so everything kind of stacks on top of you, and you feel incredibly overwhelmed. And then it's like, well, okay, which of these do I fix first? Do I figure out how to renovate the house? Do I work on my communication? Do I try to foster bursts of productivity? Do I focus on like my OCD and perfectionism? And remember that people with ADHD struggle with prioritization. And so like then what happens is each of these problems stacks up. You get overwhelmed by the 5 different problems that you have to solve. And then like you don't know what to do, and you kind of get paralyzed, right? You kind of like pull into your shell. I'm going to put your head, put your hood on. We're going to like, and then we're going to like try to just chill for a little bit, right? So what's going on here? Is why does this keep happening to this person? And what can you do about it? Can you save the relationship? So this is where the good news, I know this sounds kind of weird, but if you look at like these problems, we can look at this and we can see 5 problems. We can say, okay, there's problems with organization, problems with prioritization, problems with communication, problems with like stuff kind of getting triggered and being traumatized and like the stress of all that sort of stuff. And like the problem of like, okay, which of these problems do we tackle first? So you can look at these things and you can think that these are 5 independent problems. And if they're 5 independent problems, they have 5 independent solutions, and like you can kind of like work through them. But the good news, and this is sort of what we understand from medicine, is if I've got like a headache, a stomach ache, and a rash, what's more likely? That I've got one thing that's causing all 3 of these, or I've got 3 separate illnesses. I've got like migraines, I've got Crohn's disease, and I've got like eczema. Like it's possible that it's all 3, but it's much more likely that there's like one problem. And this is actually what we see in ADHD, and this is why there's actually like a lot of hope here. So the good news is that there's a fundamental problem which is creating each of these symptoms. And how do we understand that? Okay, so let's kind of go through that a little bit. So the biggest thing that I would say in a situation like this, and just as a caveat, each of these has things that you can absolutely do in ADHD. But I'd say the biggest problem with all of these things is setting expectations. It's like setting expectations is the biggest thing. Setting expectations for yourself, setting expectations for your partner, sort of like really understanding what the deliverable is. So I'll give you all an example. So, when you say, okay, like and this is the thing is, this is a skill that you can learn. So when you like move in with a partner, what are the expectations? Okay, are you going to contribute to rent? Are you going to clean? How often are you going to clean? What are you going to clean? When you move across the country to be with someone, what's the expectation? Is the expectation financial support for this amount of time, this amount of time? If you're renovating the house, at what point does like the house need to be done? What kind of progress are we talking about? In terms of communication, like how are we communicating? When are we communicating? How do you have conversations with people? And so the biggest thing that I tend to find with people who have ADHD is that they don't set good expectations. And this is kind of weird, but like this is what happens, right? So if we think about the mind of someone who has ADHD, we've got like 10 different things that we've got going on. And I'll try to illustrate this because I think this is the best way to kind of do this. So let's understand this. Okay, because I think there's one thing that you can do here that'll hopefully help a fair amount. Okay, let me just, okay. All right, so let's take a look at this. So what we've got here is an issue of expectation setting. Okay, so let's understand. So we've got problems with prioritization, problems with organization, problems with communication, problems with being triggered, and then the problem of fixing the above 4, right? We've actually, like, this is like problem number 5. Like, how do we deal with this, 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 and this? That's another problem. So let's try to understand how ADHD works and sort of like why this is difficult and what we can do about it. And then we'll start to see, okay, like if you find yourself falling into this core problem of, okay, I have ADHD and it negatively impacts my relationships. I find myself in the same situation over and over and over again. I don't know what to do about it. What can I do about it? Let's understand this, okay? So the first thing is that when you've got ADHD, you've got a bunch of different thoughts. Okay? And then what your brain does is with a lot of effort, you're like, okay, like this is all the crap I have to deal with. Let me organize this. So you move 1 over here. You move 2 over here. Your mind kind of does this. Okay, first I got to do this. And then next is 5. Where are 3 and 4? Who the hell knows? Then we've got 6. Then we've got 7. So this is what your mind does, right? So it's like, okay, I got to renovate a house. Let me do all this stuff. And then what happens? So you organize your thoughts, you organize your mind. Good job. And then your attention wanders. So you've spent time organizing. Let's say you spend 1 hour of your life organizing this. And then your attention wanders. And then you get distracted for 3 hours. And when you come back to the task, we're back to the jumble. Right? Now we've added 4. So, and this is something that you don't have to have ADHD to understand. Like, I don't know if any of y'all have done something like start a job application or like start to fill out an application for, let's say, college. And then if time passes between like when you organize things in your head and like, let's say like I start filling out an application and then I come back a month later, can I pick up where I left off? Absolutely not. And that's why we leave tasks undone, because we have to redo the work. Y'all get that? Like if I procrastinate for 2 weeks and I can't pick up where I left off, I have to redo the work. And so now it's like I have to spend 1 hour again, but now it's like I have to spend more time just to get back to where I was. So it's an incredibly inefficient way. And this is what happens in people with ADHD is that when you've got a lot of stuff in your head, you try to organize it, you try to prioritize it, and then as you get distracted, because remember that people with ADHD get distracted easily, right? Things get jumbled again. And then what happens is you spend a lot of time reorganizing it into 1, 2, 5, 7, 8, 9, and we forgot about 4 and we forgot about 10. So you spend 2 hours doing this, and then it gets disorganized again. We kind of come back to here. And then you go through this process, and then 9 months go by, and you haven't renovated enough, and your partner complains. Y'all see this? So what do you do about this? So what are like the problems here? So like there's one thing that you can do. I mean, there's a lot of stuff you can do. We'll kind of talk about each of these things, but the main thing that you've got to learn how to do if you're struggling with relationships in ADHD is set expectations. So your partner has to know going in what to expect. Because the other thing is that like the stress from this and the stress from this makes this process way worse. It actually makes it more easy for you to get disorganized, right? Because like now here you are trying to organize what you need to do to renovate the house. And what is your brain doing? Your brain is like, oh my God, I've lost my trust. Even if I spend 3 weeks renovating the house and doing perfectly, can I count on this person anymore? Right? Y'all see that? Like, you don't really know what you can do. Like, you don't know who you can count on. You don't know, what does this mean for me? Does this mean I have to like find a job and move out and find a place? And like, now we have to go to therapy. So like, let's add that back on there. Right? So now it's like, there's even more stuff. Now as we go up here, there's like, okay, now I have to find therapy. Now I have to find a place to live. Now I'm stressed about money because I spent all my money moving across the country to be with this person. So now you've added more things, right? So here's number 1, here's number 2, here's number 3, here's number 4, here's number 5, here's number 6, here's number 7, here's number 8. And so we get overwhelmed. And so what happens is like task upon task upon task, we get over, like the more tasks there are, the more we're overwhelmed. The more we're overwhelmed, the more we start to do work, we start to organize it, and the more we end up disorganizing ourselves because there's a lot of stuff to do. Then we've got even more numbers to sort out. So now it takes longer to sort them out. Now we're adding 11, 12, 21, 28, right? So, okay, now we have to do this and this and this and then this. And then like now it's even more to hold in our heads. And so it becomes this vicious cycle. It becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. This relationship could fall apart. You go into the next relationship. Now you have the burden of this happening twice. And so what do you do about this? Got to learn to set expectations. Got to learn to organize. Okay? So this is where, especially when it comes to relationships, I think it starts with understanding what you're capable of, and understanding what kind of support you need. It also involves like very clear expectations around things like communication, right? So I'll give you guys like sort of an example. So this is what I would advise someone who's sort of in this situation. If you're moving across the country with someone, it's like thinking through some of these things, okay? So like, okay, here's my savings. You want to move across the country and renovate a house. I'm artistic. I'm creative. That's fantastic. What is our timeline? What is our budget? How are we going to pay expenses? Right? This is what I'm putting in. I'm going to spend my savings to move across the country to be with you. And so like, what's the expectation here? Like, how long do you think this is going to take? How much progress do you want to make? Like, what's your understanding? Like, these are all the kinds of things that need to be kind of laid out. And this is what's actually hard for people with ADHD is they don't think about this stuff sort of ahead of time, right? Because, and this is the really interesting thing is that if you've got ADHD, you're so good at this kind of crap that you don't, like, you've adapted to be able to juggle a bunch of things at the same time. Since you're sort of like in a state of last minute panic and things are on fire, you've actually managed to figure out like how to manage, how to deal with fires pretty well. And so interestingly enough, instead of sitting down and organizing things from the get-go and setting expectations, what people with ADHD learn how to do is basically pull a rabbit out of a hat, dig super deep, go the extra mile, and like patch things up in a crisis situation. People with ADHD are so good at dealing with crises because they're in them all the time. So you level up your crisis management skill, but the problem is that like, even if you're really good at crisis management, it's a stressful way to live, right? It's like, and it's really difficult for partners because if your partner recognizes that your strength is in crisis management and you can let things fall apart for a long time and then like patch them back up, like that's super stressful for them. And then we see these kinds of patterns where people are kind of, they're like getting, like, look at this. This is insane. Kicked me out 3 separate times because I need to find independence. Right? So what's going on here? Like, how do you manage this kind of stuff? So, set expectations, right? So like, what does that mean, set expectations? That means Who, what, when, where, how. Start defining all these things so that both of y'all can get on the same page. The cool thing is, as you start defining these different things for yourself, okay, like what does this relationship look like in terms of financial stuff, in terms of budgeting, in terms of like, okay, where are we going to be a year from now? What it does is it externalizes things, right? So it's almost like you're sort of building a priority list. You're organizing your life a little bit that way. If you sort of like, you know whether you're on track or not on track. Because the other thing that's really confusing is that if you've been with this person for 9 months and they pop it on you after 9 months and they're like, hey, you haven't done enough. It's like, okay, well, like, what about, like, why are you springing this on me now? Like, how did you feel about it 6 months ago? How did you feel about 3 months ago? Because this is what works with people with ADHD is you have to see what's coming. So if you see what's coming, right, and you're over here, you sort of like, it'll keep you, I don't know how to say this, but it'll like kind of keep you in track. So there's a technique that works, for example, with kids with ADHD, is you have to like tell them ahead of time what's coming. So if a kid is playing with their Legos, you can't say, oh, hey, like, by the way, it's time to go to school, put away your Legos. And then like they're absorbed in the Legos. And then what happens? You like say, hey, it's time for school, it's time for school. And then you start yelling because you get frustrated because they're not paying attention. And then they get upset because they're like, they were completely absorbed in the Legos. So there's actually, I don't know if y'all remember this, but we did a lecture about parenting styles in ADHD where ADHD actually increases toxic, authoritarian, and unempathic parenting. It's, that's like literally it does that. So it shifts the way that people parent. ADHD also increases stress and worsens depression in the parents. So it can be very, very stressful for people to be in relationships with people with ADHD. Now, does that mean you're screwed? No. There's a lot you can do about it. And that's where like setting expectations is the first thing. So you've got to like map stuff out for yourself. And the good thing is once you put it on paper, if you lose it all in your head, then you've got the paper, right? So like this is the thing about ADHD is you've got bursts of creativity where you can get a lot of renovation done. So if you know where you're supposed to be 1 month, where you're supposed to be 2 months, I wouldn't sort of like focus too much about, where you want to be 6 months from now. I'd really sort of like think a little bit about what's the first thing that you've got to do and really focus on that. And then recognize that it's going to be bumpy, right? You're going to have weeks of time where you don't get any work done. The problem is that without this external structure that's based on mutual expectations, when you lose track, there's nothing anchoring you to come back when you could be productive. So let's say like, you screw up for a week or you're not able to focus for a week, but then week 2 comes around. And unless you've got something anchoring you, pulling you back, you're going to spend time like doing something else. So you're losing these windows of productivity. And you can still do it because people with ADHD can be, so there's sort of this idea of hyperfocus, right? Where there's like absurd amounts of productivity for some people. And so that's the kind of thing where it's like the successful strategy is about figuring out how can we capture those moments of productivity. And that's where setting expectations is very, very important. So this is where like, let's start with the relationship, right? So if like, and this is another kind of thing, which it's kind of interesting, but so like, what are the expectations in the relationship? Who's going to contribute what? And like, what's the standard here? So like, who's going to contribute financially? Who's going to take care of cleaning? Even in terms of cleaning, like, what does that mean? You can't use a vague term. You have to define it. What does cleaning mean? I'm supposed to keep the place clean. Well, let's think about that. Does that mean like sweeping every day? Does that mean mopping every day? Does that mean cleaning the toilets every day? Like, what is like the clean, like, let's organize it. Who, what, when, where, how? What are the expectations financially? Like, okay, like how long are we going to try this renovation stuff? What kind of progress do we want to make? Like, what are the steps of renovation? Like, let's set expectations. Because what happens in relationships is when you don't set expectations, especially if you're with someone who's neurotypical, they may not need to set out these explicit expectations because they can hold stuff in their head better. Does that make sense? So the key thing here is that like you've got to put it on a piece of paper or you have to put it out in some kind of external structure. Because if you lose track of it in your mind, which happens very quickly, you've got to start over from scratch and you'll make no progress in 9 months. So the expectation setting is very, very important. It's also very, very important from a relationship standpoint, right? So now your partner knows that you may struggle. Hey, by the way, so I'm very confident that I can renovate this house, but there are going to be periods of time where it's very, very overwhelming and periods of time where I'm going to be really, really productive. Here's what I'd like to get done in the first month. Here's what I'd like to get done in the second month, the third month, the fourth month, the fifth month, the sixth month. Now, I'm not saying that I can necessarily stick to this, but this is where, like, generally speaking, it takes me 1.5 times longer than what I set out to do. So this is a 6 months plan that may take 9 months. And let's check in regularly. Right? So then there's also an expectation around communication. This is really important if you've got ADHD or you're dating someone with ADHD. You must set a schedule of communication. You can't just talk about things when they're a problem, which is usually how relationships work, right? We don't talk about stuff unless it's a problem. That absolutely needs to change. You need to be so much more proactive. So, hey, can we check in once a month and see like how things are going? So here's why we moved across the country. How do you think that's going? Here's where we are with renovation. Here's where we are with our relationship. Here's where we are with like communication. You mentioned, that you don't like my tone sometimes. So this is where expectations become very, very important. And so if we kind of go back to this for a moment, I would sort of say like, okay, what are the expectations around organization? What are the expectations around communication? What are the expectations around therapy? So if things aren't working out in 6 months, like what do you think about starting to see a therapist? What are the expectations around money? So if I'm moving across the country, I don't have a job and I'm focused on renovating, are you comfortable financially supporting me? For what period of time are you comfortable financially supporting me? You should know this, right? So I think what's happening in a lot of this situation is I do think there are some things that you should really be careful about. So this happens a lot with people who have ADHD, which is that they need help sometimes, and people want to help them, especially if you're in a relationship. So getting kicked out 3 separate times, saying I need to find my independence. So sometimes we'll find this is somewhat of an age gap here too. There's probably also a maturity gap. So what's the expectation there? Right? If I'm a 25-year-old and I'm dating a 17-year-old and they're moving in with me, how are they going to find their independence? Like, what's your plan for finding your independence? And why do you keep moving in? If the goal is to be independent, like, why are we moving in with people very quickly over and over and over again? Getting kicked out is unfortunate for sure. But I think the other mistake in terms of am I a magnet for these situations? Why are you moving in the first place? That's the thing that you need to figure out. Are you a magnet for these situations? 100%. Right? And that's where we've got to be kind of careful here, because we're not sort of saying it's your fault, but you do have a hand in it. So it looks like you're in a relationship with someone who's grounded and compassionate. That's awesome. You're also growing, right? So this is something else that we see is like this person is learning and getting better at it, practicing self-awareness, setting boundaries better. But there's also like, how are we so quickly moving in with people? And this is the other thing that we tend to see with ADHD is that a lot of times people do need support, right? So you may have difficulty keeping a job. You may need to quote unquote mooch, where that's where like, I don't really view it as mooching as long as everyone is on the same page about what each partner is bringing to the relationship. And that's where expectation setting becomes really, really important. So in terms of how to avoid this situation, I would be really, really careful. So what we tend to look at is how the situation, so this is like the other kind of key tip. When we're trying to figure out, how do I keep on finding myself in this situation? We look at the situation when it starts falling apart. How do I stop getting kicked out? That's the problem, right? That's not the problem. If you want to fix the situation, how the hell do you keep on moving in? So like we've seen this in other places too. Like let's think about the friend zone. How do I keep on getting I express my feelings for this person. I confess my love. How do I stay out of the friend zone? And that's sort of where it's like, it's not expressing your feelings that's the problem. It's what is the formation of this relationship looking like, right? Like, how do you start to form these relationships? Do you start these relationships in a platonic way? Do you start these relationships in a professional way? Or do you start these relationships in a romantic way? And for a lot of people who get friend-zoned, they usually don't start them off romantically, right? They usually start them off platonically. And so you're setting an expectation. So the key thing about all these different things, if there's one thing to take away, if you're struggling with ADHD and you're having problems in terms of organizing, prioritizing, like if you're struggling to like communicate with your partner, it comes down to really sitting down and setting good expectations. It's like thinking through stuff ahead of time and trying to externalize as much of it as you can. Because if you try to hold it in your head, that may work for neurotypical people. They may be able to hold a lot of crap in their head. But like the second you get distracted, it all gets disorganized. Then you have to start over from square one. And then over time, stuff piles up. The more stuff piles up, the more overwhelmed you get. Now you have to even hold more stuff in your head. So whereas it used to take you 1 hour to organize your mind, now it's going to take you an hour and a half. Now it's going to take you 2 hours. And now you've actually spent 4 hours working on this thing and getting nothing done today. And then it tacks on one more task for you tomorrow because you didn't get anything done today. So then you go into the next day and now you have 5 hours worth of work to do. And so like it becomes this vicious cycle. So the first thing that you've gotta do is set expectations for yourself, externalize those expectations, write them down. Who's going to contribute what? What are you expecting from me? How are we measuring progress in our relationship? How are we measuring progress in renovation? Because if you really think about it, people with ADHD struggle, but when they have some kind of externalizing, organizing force or structure, it helps them operate way better, right? So that's what you've got to make for yourself. So this is the kind of thing where if you've got ADHD, you've got to be super careful because there's all the problems that you kind of struggle with from sort of a neurodiverse perspective, right? You may have difficulty organizing, prioritizing, but then there's the impact of that kind of stuff on your relationship. And then that which should be your safety net now becomes an additional source of stress. And the more that happens, the more you get traumatized, the more you get overwhelmed, the more it becomes a vicious cycle over and over and over again. And so you've got to start by like setting expectations with your partner, with yourself about what you're capable of, what amount of allowance you have, what progress looks like. And the more that you're able to set that external structure, as soon as you sort of snap back into it and you're able to be productive, if the task is laid out for you, you can actually make progress on it. Right? So like if it's like renovating, okay, let's start by like figuring out the paint in this room. Okay, what's the expectation around that? Okay, like what are all the steps? You got to kind of write it out. Now, this is all stuff, by the way, that we really go into in the new guide that we're making. So we made a guide about all this stuff. So I think the command is !ADHD. So I want to talk to y'all a little bit about Dr. K's guide to ADHD and doing stuff. So today we presented one solution, which is set expectations. But the truth is, and this is what we go into, people with ADHD have a lot of different challenges. And there are actually things you can do for each of those things. So why do you struggle to prioritize? How do you get distracted? How do you reduce distractions? How do you train your mind to focus? How do you manage social relationships if you have ADHD? What are the things, even if so we have stuff like tips for partners as well. If you're dating someone or in a romantic relationship or you have a child with ADHD, how do you do that? We even go into parenting kids with ADHD. What do we understand about the science of ADHD? Why is it very easy for your empathy to get burnt out if you're a parent? Right? And what actually happens, it's kind of terrifying. We've talked about this a little bit on stream, is that it changes the parenting style. Parents become less empathic. The less empathic you become, the worse the ADHD gets, because then the kid is stressed. The worse the ADHD gets, the more you have to yell at them to get their attention. And it becomes a vicious cycle. That's the biggest problem with ADHD, is that it's always a vicious cycle. And that's why it's such a crippling problem to deal with, because we don't know how to get a handle on it, right? Like you can't catch a break. And then suddenly the entire, like all four walls are crumbling down around you. And you have no sort of source of stability. And this is not just for people who have a clinical diagnosis with ADHD. This is what we're seeing in our society as a whole, that technology is shaping our attention span. It's easier to get distracted. Why is it easier to get distracted? Because companies are literally paying billions of dollars, investing billions of dollars to hire engineers to fight over your attention. YouTube is competing against TikTok. Guess what? If you spend an hour on YouTube, who gets paid? YouTube gets paid. TikTok's like, no, I want that money. And so they're investing tons and tons of money fighting against each other. They're not even fighting. Like, you're the ball. You're not even playing the game. You're getting kicked back and forth across the field by these companies. And they're like, haha. Google's like, yeah, we won. We scored a goal. TikTok's like, haha, get wrecked, noobs. We're going to score a goal. And there you are, bouncing back and forth between Instagram and Google and TikTok and like whatever. Right? They're just doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is making the most successful and engaging app they can. The question is, how do you deal with that? Like, how are you supposed to handle that, right? So that's why it's like Dr. K's Guide to ADHD and doing stuff. Because what's happening is doing stuff is becoming harder. Like, why is it becoming hard? Like, what the hell is going on? Technology is a piece of it. The other thing is that the formulas don't work anymore. So, like, how do you do stuff? And we start with super basic stuff. Why is ADHD a part of it? Because attention is the key. So if you think about what motivation is the ability to hold one thought in your mind for an extended period of time. So even if we think about being addicted to video games, what are you thinking about all the time? You're thinking about the video game. Therefore, you're motivated to play it. It's so hard to quit. We say, I lack motivation. You don't lack motivation. You have way too much motivation to play the video game. If we think about, okay, why did you click the next YouTube video? Because you saw a thumbnail and it created a thought. Once that thought is in your head, you're going to be motivated to click on it. This is something that advertisers understand. We literally have an entire field that you can study in college about shaping motivation. The tricky thing is you're shaping someone else's motivation, not your own. And now we live in a world where we have degrees. We have formal education, we have PhDs, we have specialists, we have analytics, where everyone is figuring out how to manipulate your motivation. And no wonder we're screwed. No wonder it's hard to do stuff, because we've got all of these sophisticated people out there that know how to play the motivation game in terms of engaging you and changing your behavior. That's why we made a guide about it, because we need to understand, if you want to reclaim your life, you've got to understand, how the hell does action happen? What are the different influences that create whether an action happens? If I have an idea and I have a goal, what are the different things that I can do to actually accomplish that goal? And a lot of this stuff is like all the features that we talked about. So if you've got ADHD, how do you manage your relationships? If you're in a relationship with someone with ADHD, how do you manage that? How do you prioritize? How do you organize? Why is it important to prioritize and organize? How do you set healthy technology habits? Like, this is all the stuff that's in the guide, because these are complex problems. Today, like, this is why we made a guide, by the way, because on stream, like, how much detail can I go into? You know, if I did a 10-hour lecture today on stream, first of all, like, you know, a handful of people would watch it. People are coming in and out. Y'all don't have 8 hours today to sit down and learn about ADHD. So it's like, if you really want to learn this stuff, like, we can offer some tips, which we did today, right? So it's like, there's one thing that I got to tell you. If there's like Occam's razor here, that's the root of a lot of your problems. It's incorrect expectations. The people that you're dating, like, I don't know what the expectation is when you're moving in about what you're providing and, like, you know, what the contingency plans are, like what the parachute is, like, all these things have to be sort of laid out. And once we have a shared game plan, then we can do something about it. But the truth of the matter is that it's more complex than that, right? There are issues of organization, there are issues of prioritization, there are issues of communication. If you're getting feedback from multiple people that if you don't have something nice to say, don't say it, right? And you're being more aware, like, what's going on there. Right? So there's a lot of stuff about all of these dimensions. And that's why, like, what we tend to find works is, like, not when you just do one thing, but when you do a lot of things. Because the truth is, we're complex human beings. And the internet loves to tell us, and we're guilty of this too, right? We reduced it to one thing. We simplified it. The internet loves to simplify it because our mind thinks that there are simple solutions. We want a simple solution. It's so overwhelming to think about a complex solution. But the truth of the matter is that most things, we understand this in medicine, most things are what we call multifactorial. Everyone's wondering about the nature-nurture debate. The debate has been settled, and the answer is it's both. It's not nature or nurture, it's nature and nurture. Even if we look at addiction, addiction is a genetic vulnerability plus an environmental trigger. That's how an addiction forms. So is it genetic? Yeah. Is it environmental? Yeah. Is it nature? Yes. Is it nurture? Yes. So how do you fix it? You work on both of those things, right? You work on the underlying biology and you work on the environment. In terms of ADHD, you learn how to prioritize, you learn how to organize, you understand on a most basic level where motivation comes from and how human beings actually do stuff. You learn how to do things like operationalize. There's worksheets, there's meditations, there's all this good stuff. So check it out, because this is where, like, you know, it's a mammoth work, because we were trying to figure out, okay, like, how do we help people do stuff? What's the most basic problem in our community, in our society? It's that I want to do something and I don't, right? I don't actually end up doing it. Why don't you do it? Well, today I spent time on YouTube, or today I spent time on this, or but at the end of the day, like, we have these goals and we just don't do them. And why is that? And then what happens is we think we're idiots. We're like, oh, I must be like, I'm lazy. And all those disciplined chads out there, they're the lucky ones. I'm the lucky one. No, it actually turns out like they may be lucky. Who knows? But the cool thing is, like, this can be taught, right? You can teach someone how to swim. You can teach someone how to cook. You can teach someone how to think. You can teach someone how to do stuff. The other random thing, you know, which is interesting, is that, so we met with some people 2 days ago, including the Office of the Surgeon General. And what they were talking about is that, like, what we need is stuff, we need educational overhauls in terms of, like, social and emotional skills training. That's what they're working on. So I met someone who runs a school who, like, every week they teach, like, social skills and like their students how to understand emotions. It's part of the educational curriculum, right? So somewhere along the way, like, we're making a shift, thankfully, away from just understanding things outside of us and recognizing that if you want to be successful in life, you've got to understand this stuff too. Yeah, so for people who are saying, I needed that, so like S. Borealis is saying, Giga Chad School, Des1615 saying, I needed that when I was in school. That's why we're here, right? So for those of you that didn't have that in school, we're going to teach you, or we're going to do our best to teach you anyway. Right? So understand, like, how to do stuff. Like, has anyone taught you how stuff gets done? Like, that's what the guide is about. So this is a great question. So it's a movie. Is ADHD and ADD the same beast, just a different way of it being expressed? Not exactly. So one involves hyperactivity and one involves no hyperactivity. So they both have disordered attention. There's actually a third variant of ADHD, which I think is gaining popular acceptance, or not popular acceptance, but academic acceptance, which I'm a big believer in, which is that there's an ADD subtype that involves specifically emotional dysregulation. So, like, people get irritable, they kind of, and we go into that too. So by the way, for those that, like, it's neuroscience heavy, okay? So, like, you may have to watch it a couple times because we really dig into the neuroscience a lot. Okay. Let's move on. Yeah, Miss Jack, that's me. That's what I'm saying. Like, so there's a lot of stuff about emotion. So here's the thing. So I'll give you all kind of a quick teaser from the guide, okay? So here's what it kind of boils down to. So we have our negative emotional centers, right? Amygdala and hippocampus, which experience negative emotions. So what is it? Which part of our brain puts our amygdala in check? So, like, what part of our brain makes sure that our amygdala doesn't run rampant? Do y'all remember? Guess? Excellent. Tanya Sakaya says, good. Scalen, Elodin. So good. You guys are learning. This is great. So y'all will be ready for this level of neuroscience. It's the frontal lobe, prefrontal cortex. Guess what part of the brain is on the struggle bus in people who have ADD? Right? The frontal cortex, PFC. So what we see is that it's not just about restraining attention. There's actually a subtype, and we know this, that the ability in people who have ADD for the prefrontal cortex to control and inhibit their amygdala is reduced. So what that means is that your amygdala, your negative emotions are like running buck wild in your brain, and that you can't get them under control. So you experience an intensity of negative emotion that then overrides your reward circuitry. So there's another really interesting thing. If we look at our behavioral circuitry, there's the nucleus accumbens, which is our dopamine reward circuitry. And so there's like, it's like soup, like, anyway, so we go into detail here, but now we're going into detail now because it's neat. And the other thing that happens is that your amygdala's ability to hijack and control your nucleus accumbens is worse in ADHD. So it's like easier for you to get hijacked by your emotions. It's harder for you to put the brake on your emotions. And then what you end up with is a situation where someone's emotions affect them more profoundly than, let's say, a neurotypical person. So Sorza do is lucky. Is, damn it, so it's harder to be happy? No. This is different. So happiness is a completely different thing. It's easier for you to be controlled by your negative emotions. It's harder for you to put your negative emotions in check. It doesn't actually have anything to do with happiness. It just means that it's easier for you to get knocked off, if that makes sense. So Pirate Hippo is saying, oh, this is why I feel brain damaged. So, so do people struggle with it 100%? But like, here's my point is that even if y'all struggle with it, I would like to hope that with enough support, y'all are not effectively damaged at all, right? So that's where like we even know that the diagnosis of ADHD correlates with things like student to teacher ratio. So ADHD, I know it sounds kind of weird. There's like a neuroscience component, but it is neuroscience plus environment. That's what truly brings out the ADD. It's having a particular brain and a lack of structure in the environment. So what we know is that when there are more teachers and fewer students, kids don't even get diagnosed with ADHD because there's enough teacher support to direct the kid's attention. Right, so you get distracted, the kid, like the teacher brings you back. You get distracted, the teacher brings you back. That's enough. You just need to be brought back twice. But now when there's 40 kids in the classroom instead of 25, the teacher can bring you back once, but then they've got to spend time bringing back another kid. Both of y'all get diagnosed with ADD. Y'all see that? It's like that simple. And so that's where like what our goal is to give you all that structure, help you understand how do I prioritize, how do I make a task list? Because no one ever teaches you, hey, here's how to make a task list. Like what happened to me when I was in college is that my parents would tell me, you need to focus. You need to apply yourself. I still remember my 9th grade English teacher was like, if he applied himself, he would be fantastic. And then I left the parent-teacher conference, and my dad was like, did you hear that? You need to apply yourself. And I said, yes. Went home, had dinner, did a little bit of homework, went to sleep, woke up the next day. No one taught me how to apply myself. Right? Like, we don't teach this stuff. And that's what I loved about India. Like, I went to India, and they were like, here is how you apply yourself. I was like, this can be taught? You can teach me? And then like I learned it and I was like, this is wild, man. That's why I decided to become a monk. I was like, I want to learn everything else. Like, where does happiness come from? Here's how you be happy. They told me. They're like, literally, I had a teacher who was like, here is how you be happy. And he taught it to me and I experimented with it. And I was like, it's that simple? Yes. I'm not saying it's easy, but there's a very simple formula for happiness. right? Did y'all actually, we did this the other day. Did you guys do your meditation? I needed to post on Reddit. I'll do that today. Yeah, so someone's asking like a Gurukul, like Devaria Mehta is asking like a Gurukul, 100%. So here's something I want y'all to understand, then we're going to move on to posts, okay? Back in ancient India, basically people went to boarding schools. But the boarding schools taught kids like yoga and meditation and spirituality and that stuff too. So it wasn't just learning like external information. Like half of the curriculum was like learning about yourself, how the mind works, how to get motivated, how to sleep, how the body works. Like everyone was taught some basic amount of medicine. Everyone was taught some basic amount of personal psychology. They didn't study experiments that teach us general principles of like other people. They're like, hey, by the way, here's how you train your mind. Here's how you focus your mind on one thing. Here's how you manage happiness. Here's how you deal with negative emotions. Here's how you understand what you're feeling. Here's how you metabolize negative emotions when they're overwhelming you. This is the kind of stuff that was a standard part of the curriculum for all people. The Ruby1154 is saying, we need the formula. We need the formula. Sure. So I've given you the formula before. So last week we had a meditation, and the meditation was, what does observing pleasure do to the pleasure? Do y'all remember that? If you did that practice, you understand the formula. Okay. Let's move on. All right, this is a good one. Okay. Has anyone actually found a girlfriend? There are many people in this community who are unable to find a girlfriend, and Dr. K addressed this subject quite often and gave his advices. But I wonder, it's a good question, right? If anyone here actually made it out of this situation. So let's understand this for a moment, okay? Has anyone here actually found a girlfriend? So this is what happens. I'm looking for love. And I show up on this place called the internet. And I'm like, yo, people, how does one find love? And a lot of people give me answers. There's no shortage of answers. Right? I can go to YouTube, I can go to Reddit, I can go to advice forums, I can, probably not LinkedIn, but there are a lot of other places where people talk about how to find relationships. I watch videos about alpha males, I watch videos about beta males, I watch videos about sigma males, I watch videos from people who are in touch with themselves emotionally. I watch videos about growth, and like I watch Dr. K, and then like everyone gives me answers. Like, look at all of the answers there are. There's so many different answers. And then I go to places like, I don't know, let's take a look at the dating advice subreddit. Right? Are my, like 1.1 upvotes, are my standards too high, or does the dating pool just suck? Worst sex I've ever had, but I like him. No text back after a second date. Right? So let's sort by top. A perfect girl canceled our date only 20 minutes prior. I was already the Uber. This just happened to me 5 minutes ago. No text back after a second date. How to attract people you're attracted to. Like, what do you think? You think this stuff works? So here's what's hard about this situation. If you're looking for a relationship, you're like a motivated person, right? You're like, okay, like this is important to me. I'm going to focus on it. So you go and you collect information, you do research. What do people tell you? They tell you work on yourself. Don't try too hard. Just be yourself. Be the best version of yourself. Right? They give you this kind of advice. You're like, all right, let's go. So you work on yourself. Because everyone's telling you don't try to like find a relationship. You're going to appear desperate. And just work on yourself in the relationship. The relationship will come. All you have to do is open yourself up to the universe and the relationship will come. You focus on yourself. You cannot control the actions of others. You can only control yourself. So you must work on yourself. And you do that for 6 months or a year. No relationship. you lose heart a little bit and you're like, all right. So you're like, you take a break for a little while because like you can't, how long can you do the Sigma grind set? And then like, a couple months go by, you're feeling lonely again. You like turn back to the internet and you're like, all right, what do I do about this? And everyone's like saying the same thing. Work on yourself, work on yourself, work on yourself. So you're like, all right, here we go again. Work on yourself. So you work on yourself for a while. And then like 6 months go by, 8 months go by, 1 year goes by. You're making progress, right? So you're like more in shape. You got a promotion. You like went to therapy. You're doing everything right. Second year goes by and you're like still scratching your head and you're like went on a couple dates, but as we saw, this person canceled 20 minutes before I showed up. This person never texted me back. Like this kind of crap happens. And then you're like kind of shrugging your shoulders and you're like, wait a minute. Does this crap actually work? So you dig deep. 6 months, a couple months of loneliness go by and you're like the only thing I can control is myself. I cannot control the actions of others. Let me control myself. I'll work on myself more. Work, 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 work. So you work on yourself again. They're like, here's the thing. At some point, there's got to be a payoff. And each time you go through this cycle and you feel like, okay, I got to work on myself. Because that's what people say is going to work, right? Is working on myself. You work on yourself and it doesn't work. And then people are like, just work on yourself more, bro. And I'm like, all right, okay, fine. So you dig deep again. You use a lot of willpower, overcome it. You're like, there's a little bit of despair, right? Because you've been doing this now for a couple of years. You've been working on yourself, but no one seems to care how much progress you've made. No one gives a shit. And then like you dig deep and then you do it again. Ride this, get back on the bucking bronco. And then you ride it for a while and it tosses you off. And then you're like, man, I'm so tired of working on myself. When? Everyone talks about how. No one talks about when. Is there even a when? And then you start to doubt yourself. And then it's sort of like, you don't know. So what's going on here? Like, how do you deal with this? How do you understand, first of all, why does everyone keep on saying work on yourself? And like, why doesn't that seem to work? Or does it work? Or why do they think it's work? Why does it work for them, but it doesn't work for you? Like, what are you missing? So we've got to start this by understanding a little bit about how belief structures form and a little bit about how information is poorly disseminated on the internet. So the first thing to understand is that we have these things that Aaron Beck sort of coined as core beliefs. Thousands of years ago, the yogis called these samskars. So let's like understand, first of all, like how we get into this situation and what to do about it. So the first thing to understand is that as we navigate the world, our brains try to make sense of stuff. Our brain tries to come up with formulas that make it easy to navigate things because you have to like simplify crap. So our brains look at lots of different experiences and then they form conclusions that make it easy. Like, I'm a good person. Or I'm not a good person, right? So if I get yelled at a lot when I'm a kid, my brain sort of figures out, okay, I'm not a good person. And then actually that's adaptive. Because if I sort of start to realize, like, so let's say that, a tragic story. Let's say I'm a talented kid. And I do really, really well. And my parents are actually jealous of me. This actually happens, by the way. So as they become jealous of me, what do? They beat me down, right? They call me not a good kid. And then what happens is I start to internalize that belief. I come to conclusions. Oh, I did a good job. Mom and dad yelled. I did a good job. They yelled. I did a good job. They yelled. Ergo, I'm a bad person. Now what happens if I'm a bad person, I stop doing a good job. Now I conform to my parents' expectations. As I conform to my parents' expectations, oddly enough, it hurts less. So now I've figured out the rules of the game and how to play that game. This then becomes a core belief. Then what happens is core beliefs spew these things. So this is what Aaron Beck sort of laid out. So core beliefs are like beliefs about myself, like I am unlovable or I will be alone forever. Then what happens is these core beliefs form adaptations. So we adapt to them. We start to make assumptions. We start to make rules for how to live my life based on this core belief. And then those rules then will spawn something called automatic thoughts. So this is where, like, if someone doesn't text me back right away, oh, she doesn't care or he doesn't care. Like that thought is immediate. It's severe and it's automatic. So what the yogis basically said the same thing. What they said is that when you have an emotional experience that is undigested, the emotion sinks down and goes dormant. And then that emotion can get triggered, and all of the thoughts that come with that emotion will now be applied to your current situation. So if the last time that my partner was being shady and not returning my texts, they were having an affair, that's a lot of emotions to manage, right? I break up with them. That becomes baggage, relationship baggage, right? We even understand that now. Like yogis were smart. Aaron Beck was smart, but like we don't have to be smart. Everyone understands that people have relationship baggage. What does that mean? It's the emotions that you carry over, the patterns that you carry over, the assumptions that you carry over from the last relationship. So as we carry over these assumptions of, oh, like people are untrustworthy, then if your partner is like not available for a few hours, you have thoughts. Boom. This person is cheating. Where are those thoughts coming from? This person is giving you no reason to distrust them. The distrust is actually coming from you, right? So that's what they sort of said that's what a samskara is. It's very similar to a core belief. So if you're entering the dating pool, the first thing you've got to understand is like, what are your beliefs about this? Do you believe that you can find someone? Do you believe that you are lovable? Do you believe that you are worthy of having like a good relationship? Do you believe you deserve a relationship? There may be other kinds of core beliefs. Even if you believe that you deserve a relationship, do you believe that there are factors outside of your control that are preventing you from having that relationship? Right? So this is some of the intermediate beliefs that Aaron Beck sort of talked about is sort of like, we'll see this where we can say like, oh, because of things like concepts like sexual marketplace value or whatever, like, you know, oh, these are like adaptive beliefs that essentially compensate for the idea that like, I'm terrified of being alone. So we come up with all these like rules and ideas. Now, the key thing to understand about all these core beliefs and samskars is that we tend to think about them as coming from the inside and affecting the outward world, right? So if I get triggered in a particular way, I'll feel emotionally bad. It'll generate thoughts in my head. It'll generate behaviors. So the directionality of core beliefs, as most people think about it, is outward, right? So there's a belief that I hold. It shapes my thoughts, which in turn shapes my emotions and shapes my behavior. What people lose sight of is that core beliefs don't just shape your thoughts, they also shape your perceptions. Huge, undervalued piece of information. So if you believe you are unlovable, what that means is you will amplify particular signals and you will reduce other signals. So what happens is every time something happens, let's say that you have a 50-50, and one person says, oh yeah, I'm really interested in seeing you again, and another person doesn't answer your texts. Your mind will actually hang on to one more than the other. So it shapes your perceptions. And that's how you get to this. Does it actually happen? Because what happens is all of the positive information tends to get filtered out and the negative information tends to get amplified. Now, the problem with this is like this has been going on for thousands of years. So what's changed now? Now, what's changed is this. So not only does my mind amplify negative information and reduce positive information, but the internet itself amplifies negative information and reduces positive information. So I want you all to think about this. If you look up information on relationships on the internet, doesn't matter whether it's Discord or Reddit or YouTube or whatever, are people who are in healthy relationships chain posting? Are there communities about, I have an awesome relationship? There's no community like that. What happens if you post on dating advice, hey, I have an amazing relationship? What do you think is going to happen? You're going to get downvoted. Bragging, arrogant, all the people on there are resentful, get downvoted into oblivion. Right? So the internet doesn't, like, are there 1,000 videos about how to find relationships? Yes. Are there 1,000 videos about, hey, my relationship is awesome, I'm grateful? Who the hell would watch that? What is the point of watching that? So not only do we have this cognitive bias, but the other thing that happens is that the internet amplifies that. So we amplify the negative, we reduce the positive, and the internet like just turns both of those dials like way up. And so then what we get is a perception. We get this question. And what I love about this community is like this person was like critical enough to think about this and be like, actually, hold on a second. Because I want y'all to appreciate this for a second. This person recognized that they had a thought. I'm not going to find a girlfriend and this crap doesn't work for people. And then they were critical of it. By the way, you guys want to see what the answers are? So what do you think? Do you think people actually find girlfriends? What do y'all think, chat? Huh? Do people find girlfriends? Yay or nay? So Rhino Gator saying no. Impossible. No, 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 no. Let's see. First answer. Yeah. I met my girlfriend through mutual friends. When we first met, I wasn't even looking to date her. Just thought, hey, she's cool. We kept hanging out. I really enjoyed her company. Then one night we got drunk and hooked up, and that was that. Right? Let's go down. Yes. But I think that finding a girlfriend or boyfriend is a unique quest for every player. There's much more to that in the simple yes or no answer. My consistent problem for roughly 10 years ago is my tendency to withdraw. Frankly, in the last 6 or 7 years, passing fantasies, focusing on myself. Basically, I'm a lot more social now. I perform betterly. I'm kind of a late bloomer. So it seems like this person is improving but hasn't found it yet. Gaming wife here. So this person's married. Yes, dude, of course. It's not this impossible quest that some people on this Reddit think it is. Then the question becomes, why do people think? I don't know. This is great. I don't know. I'm 29 and I've never been anywhere near close to having a girlfriend, right? So this is where your automatic thought says, but I'm not like other people. I am hopeless. I'm convinced. At this point, I'm convinced. Here's the core belief. I'm no good and no one will ever want me. Hey, man, I used to feel the same way and I'm engaged now. A good friend of mine was 30 when he finally had a girlfriend and lost his virginity. A friend, his acquaintance of mine was 31. There's nothing magical about these ages. Wow. Right? Like, you know, like, I know it's kind of weird, but the problem is that, so most of the people are saying, yes, this stuff works. Here's the big piece of information that's missing. No one tells you the timeline. Everyone tells you what to do. No one tells you how long it'll take. And that's what screws people. Because then what happens if you spend a year working on yourself and you don't find a girlfriend, you're like, screw it. I did what they said and it's not working. It's like when we plant a seed, we don't expect a fruit within a year, right? We have a good expectation of like, all right, I got to plant this seed. It's got to shoot. It's got to become a shoot. Then it's become a tree. Then it's going to have flowers. And a couple years from now, it'll have fruit. We know what to expect. It's like, imagine if you went to college and you were like, oh, like, how do I find a job? Go to college. And no one told you how long college takes. Like, imagine how idiotic college would seem. You're like, I've been here for a friggin' year. Where's the job? And so then you like quit for a little while. And then you go back to college. You do your second year. You're like, where's the job? You go back. People are like, yeah, just go to college, go to college, go to college. That's how you get a job. You go for a third year. You're like, where's the job? No one tells us in terms of this dating advice crap how long it takes. And so we have no idea what to expect. And that's like like you'll get this. It's a critical piece of information. How long do I need to work on myself for this crap to work? No one talks about durations. And why is that? Because it's individualized, sort of, right? But that's where we can actually like go into data and we can understand, okay, how long does it take? And let's like kind of luck. And then it becomes super confusing because it's like, okay, what amount of this do I need to improve and what amount of this is time? Because if someone says it takes 5 years and then I kind of like do stuff, but I don't try hard enough, like in 5 years, what if it doesn't work? It gets super confusing. So what do you, if you're wondering, if you're out there and wondering, okay, all this crap about finding a romantic partner, does it actually work? So here's the answer. Yes, it works. It just takes a really long time. We're talking 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 7 years. So it's sort of like, honestly, it's like opening a loot box. That's what dating is. Finding a romantic partner is opening a loot box. I don't know exactly what the odds are. There are certain things you can do to improve the odds. But at the end of the day, the only guaranteed way to get the item is to keep opening loot boxes. I don't know what the odds are. I wish I could tell you. But in my experience, if you have like no social skills whatsoever and you're like going nowhere in life, give it at least 5 years. And for those of you who are saying, I can't do this for 5 years, that sounds depressing. Like, I don't know what else to tell you. 5 years is not that long of a time. Give yourself 5 years to grow into a human being that someone else would want to date. Work on your social skills. Get professionally independent. Get financially independent. Become professionally successful. Get into shape physically. Take care of your mental. Like, this stuff takes time. The other thing is, I don't actually think it's going to take 5 years, but here's the magical thing. When you set a target, I'm sort of like debating y'all and also like de-debating y'all in a moment. But if you give yourself 5 years, you won't expect anything in 2 years. And when you're expecting it is when you're not expecting it is when it's the most likely to happen. Right? The top post was like, I wasn't even trying to date. I just thought this person was cool and we were hanging out. And that was a lot of fun. That is the most successful. Even with the person that I married, like, I didn't even realize we were going on dates. She was telling me, yeah, you took me on a date. I'm like, no, I didn't. What are you talking about? I was just showing you around town. You were like new to town. And I was like, I'll just show you around. Oh, you like Thai food? Like, I know a great place. Let's go. So like, absolutely focus on yourself. Absolutely, like, give it time though. We're talking about 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. Sometimes what it requires is obliviousness on your part. Why does the obliviousness matter? I know it sounds kind of weird, but once you get out of your own head, like, it's so much easier. And that's the thing, is like, because when we think about it, why is it so hard when we're in our own head to date people? It's like literally we are in our head, so we're not attending to the other person. We're not empathically connecting with them. We're empathically connecting with our anxious self. And so then I become anxious. I start to worry about particular things. I'm not really paying attention to her. I'm kind of zoned out, or I'm kind of staring and distracted. What? And then like the person I'm on a date with is kind of like, that's weird. Makes them feel a little bit uncomfortable. I see them becoming a little bit uncomfortable. The anxiety in my head goes, oh no, now they're not having fun. I'm not fun anymore. Oh crap. Now what do? How do I get them to have fun? Have fun, have fun, have fun. Figure it out. You can make it have fun. You can make it have fun. And then they see the desperation in your face. And they're like, what the fuck is going on? So get out of your head. Focus on yourself. Put yourself out there. Right? Like, that advice is all true. Like, there's a reason why we hear it over and over and over again. But give it time. Recognize that for the first year, second year, like when you're putting yourself out there, you're not going to get much. What you're really doing is like leveling up. We're not zoning into the raid yet. We're just getting ready to zone in. Right? That's really the solution. And chances are it takes years. I mean, it takes a lot of people. Like, I don't know what the average age is for people to get married, but I get the sense it's getting older. So I'd say like 26, 27 is probably average, I would say. 28 maybe. And for the people saying, but I'm 31. Yeah, 27 is average. That means that there are a lot of people getting married at 21 and there are a lot of people getting married at 33. 35, like there's a range. So how long does it take? Years. Does it work? Absolutely. Just keep at it. And all along the way, the last piece that of advice or guidance I'll give you, any amount of resentment that you have about this whole process is 100% justified and 100% needs to be dealt with. If you're hopeless and resentful, completely get you, bro or girl or whatever you are in between. Totally fine. Because things for non-binary people are not easier, let me tell you what. Totally fine to be resentful. And you need to manage that outside of the dating sphere, right? Because we see this. Like when that resentment enters, when people don't text you back, you're sabotaging yourself. You're shooting yourself in the foot. You're making it even harder. Then that becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, enhances the core belief that people don't care about me, when really what they're detecting from me is resentment. And like, what are you expecting? If you project resentment, what do you think? Someone's going to fall in love with you because you're a resentful person? Like, that's going to be tricky. So manage those emotions externally. Go see a therapist, work with someone, like work with a coach if you want to, talk to friends, vent about it on Discord. You know, like you've got to manage that stuff. And by the way, this is why, so I know this sounds kind of weird. I'm going to tell you all a story. So when I was training to become a psychiatrist, they asked us a question. They said, if a patient walks into your office and says, can you help me find a girlfriend? What should your answer be? And there were a lot of right answers, but there was just one wrong answer. The wrong answer, according to my teachers, was yes, I can help you do that. The right answers were, I don't know. What do you think makes it hard for you to find a girlfriend? Why is that important to you? That sounds like it's very important to you. Do you feel lonely? Those were all correct answers. The one wrong answer, right? And that's what we train to do as therapists. The one wrong answer is yes. Because we are taught as therapists that an outcome for a patient is not our responsibility. I lost a little bit of faith in therapy that day. I think therapy is wonderful. I love being a therapist. But I lost a little bit of faith in how hands-off the profession is. Now, there may be therapists out there that disagree with that. There may be therapists out there that, you know, consider that to be an unfair attack on the profession. It's just my experience. I think it's not uncommon, by the way. So I think oftentimes when people go to therapy looking for guidance, what they get is questions. That's why I started a coaching program. Because like at the end of the day, like there are people out there in our community who are like looking to find a girlfriend. There are people out there who are looking to find a relationship, boyfriend. There are people out there who are like have a particular goal that they want to achieve. And if we look at outcome measures for therapy, you know, being in a stable relationship is not something that we measure. It's not an outcome that we're trained towards. Do we do stuff around couples therapy? 100%. But it's couples therapy, right? It presumes like the starting point. So if you think about, you know, there's this degree called a LMFT, Licensed Marriage and Family Therapist. The presumption is that the marriage is already there. Y'all get that? Couples counseling. It presumes that you're already a couple. You can get trained in that as a therapist. But what about getting into a relationship in the first place? Where's the certification for that in therapy? And this is the difference. Couples counseling is about taking a marriage or a relationship that is having challenges, is busted in some way, and bringing it back to health. That's the medical model. The coaching model is, let's help you achieve your goals. Let's help you understand what are your samskars. That's why we teach coaches about Vedic psychology in this Eastern perspective. What are your samskars? What are the emotions from the past that make you resentful so that it's hard for you to date today? Let's understand how you work and what your goals are. And once we understand those two things, we can figure out a path to help you achieve them. That's what coaching is about. That's why I fell in love with it. I went to my first coaching conference and I was like, this is actually amazing. What I realized, and this is where I got, one of my supervisors once told me, yeah, I see what you're doing is really valuable to people, but it's not therapy. And I got super confused by that. And what I realized is what I do was heavily informed by like my training as a monk, which is helping people find happiness, not curing depression. Those are two separate things. And so if it comes to goal achievement, and if it comes to understanding your resentment, if it comes to a place where you need to offload those emotions and have a coach sort of be like, yeah, that really sucks that this person doesn't text you back. I imagine you must feel really resentful. What are you going to do about it tomorrow? Let's manage those emotions here and send you back in with a little bit of hope, like dismantle that samskar a little bit. Let's process it here, and then let's figure out a plan for you to start dating again. That's why we started this coaching program. Because the truth of the matter is that it's not, for those of y'all that are interested in like treatment, right? So if you've got, if you're in a relationship and you need marriage counseling, like don't come to a coach, like go to a LMFT. If you've got major depressive disorder or bipolar disorder, go see a psychiatrist or a therapist. If you've got, really bad social anxiety or generalized anxiety disorder or panic attacks, like go see a therapist. But if you're someone who's trying to figure out how to navigate this world and no one taught you the rules and you need some amount of guidance and facilitation, and it's not that the coaches have all the answers, so it's not what they have is a methodology to help you understand what are your values, what are your motivations, what are your roadblocks, what are your goals, and like dismantling those roadblocks and starting to make forward progress. That's what coaching is about. And there's a reason why, for the first time in 18 months, we actually have coaching spots. And like we're working with coaches as fast as we can. We're trying to like get them ready to help y'all as fast as we can. Program's been full for 18 months. We finally have about 100 spots. That's because we're just like, in 2022, in the last year, we've taught as many coaches as we have in the 18 months before that or more. And like and the reason is because this is what people need. And this is what we presented at the American Psychiatric Association, is peer support services actually help people. That you can actually improve depression and anxiety without treating depression and anxiety. But wait, does that make it a medical treatment? I don't know. If you're obese and that's a medical diagnosis, or you have type 2 diabetes and that's a medical diagnosis, and you go to a personal trainer and you start exercising and you lose weight and your insulin resistance improves, does that mean that a personal trainer is practicing medicine? You can get clinical improvements without clinical interventions. And the way that our coaching program helps people with their depression and anxiety is not by treating depression and anxiety. It's by helping them find a romantic partner. It's by helping them get a job. It's by helping them set boundaries on other people. How do I set and enforce boundaries? Those are the kinds of skills that we teach. In our parent coaching program, that's what we do. How do you set effective boundaries on a kid who's addicted to video games? Kids are terrified. They're like, oh my God, Dr. K is going to quit my parents with the ability to control me. No, it's not really what we do. It's sort of what we do. But what we explain to the parents is like, if you want to set limits on video game addiction, you can't have your kid working against you. They've got to be on your team. Y'all are fighting against an addiction. There's no way you can win against an addiction if the person who's addicted is not trying to win. Impossible. So our parent coaching program is about helping parents understand their kids. How can you get them on your team, and how can both of y'all work towards something together? In terms of like personal coaching, it's like, for most of y'all, it's about same thing. It's like understanding yourself. And even in that way, it's like all the self-sabotage that you do. Why the hell do you do that? Where does that come from? Instead of just assuming that you're incompetent or lazy, why don't you try to understand it for once? Why don't you try to like understand like why you do this to yourself and what needs you meet by sabotaging yourself? And it works, right? Like that's at end of the day, like it works. So hopefully we'll have a published study soon, right? So we're in the process of submitting for publication. So we've done our data analysis and things like that. Our outcomes are good. Like that's why we do it. It's not like, oh, Dr. K just had a great idea. It must be successful. That's not how it works. By the way, we've revised our coach curriculum 6 times in 2 years. That's why we succeed. And there's another thing that I'm really, really happy about, which is something that I noticed is missing from our profession. So for those of y'all that are therapists, hopefully this will make sense. So if a patient doesn't show up, let's say you have an initial appointment with a patient and they don't show up, or they show up for the first appointment and never come back. Why didn't they come back? So as a profession, if someone doesn't show up, they don't show up, and there's no follow-up. Right? So someone's saying, so Iconic Whale is saying ADD, Aaron BB2 is saying social anxiety. Why did they not show up? Because it wasn't a one and I'm fixed. They just forgot. They don't care. They're all that's my point. There's all kinds of reasons. So here's the thing. If I'm a therapist and someone doesn't show up, how do I fix that? How do I improve it? Right? And I see this post a lot on the psychotherapy subreddit where people are like, oh, I'm so frustrated because we've been working on this thing for 6 months and this person came in and told me that their coach really helped them with this. And what do you think happens on the psychotherapy subreddit? People are like, oh no, you should give yourself a pat on the back. Like you've really been doing the work and like the client just doesn't understand it. Whoa. Hold on a second. So here's the biggest problem with the field of therapy right now, not the biggest problem. One of the things that's really missing in the field of therapy is we don't have good feedback. And so we don't actually learn from our mistakes. What happens is we get ghosted by patients and we don't understand what happens. So part of the reason that our coaching program is successful, part of the reason we've had 6 curriculum changes over the course of 2 years is because we collect feedback. And y'all tell us. There was a post the other day on our subreddit where someone was like, my coach doesn't know my name. Is this normal? And we're like, no, it's not. Please tell us what on earth is going on. Right? There are avenues for feedback. There's like post-session feedback. We measure outcomes. We know which coaches are good, which coaches are doing poorly. We check in with them. We also we'll do positive deviance studies on our coaching program, which is like really cool. No, it's not fired. Right? It's like understanding what's going on. How did this client get this impression? Do you actually know their name? Because it could be the client, right? Because sometimes people post stuff on the internet and they're complaining about things. I don't know if you all have seen like, nasty Yelp reviews where it's like, these people their service is terrible. They wouldn't give me, I was waiting for an hour and then I walked out after an hour. And it's like, yeah, you showed up at 9:45. The kitchen closes at 9:30. And we told you that we have no food, like you're not going to eat here, and then you got upset and then you left. Right? So it's like, that's where like this process needs to be investigated. And that's what I'm really happy about is that when we actually collect feedback and we iterate on it, our coaching program improves. So anyway, if y'all are interested in this kind of stuff in terms of goal setting, motivation, trying to understand like what holds you back, then by all means sign up. Because we've been trying really hard to keep up with demand and finally we've got spots available. So I know a lot of y'all have been waiting for a while, so definitely sign up. Krusty O is saying, I signed up as well. Major vouch. Good. I'm glad. Weeb supremacy is, are values discovered or made? That's a fantastic question. I'd say a combination of both, but that's exactly what, here's how you sign up. What method do coaches use? So the curriculum was developed by me. So it leans on some evidence-based scientific principles. So we'll teach some neuroscience, we'll teach some motivational interviewing. Vedic psychology is a lot of what we lean into, but it's a lot of skills-based training. So this is the other big thing that's a little bit different is if you think about, I don't know if any of y'all are therapists out there, but like you think about how much time you spend in the classroom and how much do you learn in 5 years of like, getting a PhD versus like working with people. So we have a heavily skills-based focus. It's about helping people understanding themselves. So how do you ask questions? How do you listen? How do you, it's very similar to, we teach the skills that I use when I stream, basically, right? Which is like, how do you like help people find like the issue relatively quickly? I mean, they're not going to find it quite as fast, and it's also a little bit different, but generally speaking, it's like interviewing skills, trying to understand this Vedic model of the mind and things like that, and then using that to help people find their problems, clarify goals, clarify resistance, and then tackle that resistance. Thanks for the gifted subs, by the way. Moose yells. Yeah, so I'm 30. Is that too old for college? I probably wasted my life, says Thug Game. So that's exactly the kind of thing that I think people in coaching work on. So there's a lot there. Let's just like look at that for a second, okay? So I'm 30. Is it too late? I've wasted my life. So if you wanted to apply, what emotions do you think would come up? The sense of wasting your life. The sense that you're too old. Now, 4 years from now, you can be 34 and have a college degree, or 34 and not have a college degree. Which one is better for you? Which plan is better? How are you going to think through that? Because what you want to do is come up with the best plan, not let your emotions or feeling that you're too old actually get in the way of the best plan. Does that make sense? And this idea that I've wasted my life, you're just 30, you've got 50 years left. You really start taking control like around 21 or 22, let's be honest. Right? And like just because you've wasted some solid years doesn't mean that you need to continue wasting them. Right? It's like you're the person who GG's out at 7 minutes into a Dota game because like you lost your lanes. Which, let's be fair, is sort of logical, but also is a mistake. Y'all get that? So here's the thing. When you GG out at 7 minutes, up here, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You do actually lose the game. And then what happens the next time? Oh, that last game where I GG'd out at 7 minutes was an absolute stomp. So the next time you lose the lane again, you GG out at 7 minutes and you get crushed. And the next time you do it, you get crushed. Y'all get that? This is what you need to overcome. Is that you're not wrong. You're just way more powerful than you recognize. Right? That's huge. Like what we try to help our coaches do is help you figure out that you actually have way more control over the situation than you recognize. You're not wrong. Last 3 games were a stomp and you did lose the laning phase. The key thing is that you're missing out on what you can actually control. And this is exactly what we're talking about in terms of the, like this, I'm 30 years old. Am I too late to go to college? Think about all the emotions that keep you're GGing out. Am I too old? If I were to say yes, okay, good. I'm glad I GG'd out. If I were to say no, how would you respond? Right? And this is where like, I don't think you're too old. You're as old as you. I don't think college changes depending on your age. Like, I don't know if y'all know this, but the classes are the same. You know? Just win lane. Yeah, so Ice Anima is saying, can you talk about available support for people who can't afford coaching? Absolutely. So that's why like most of what we do, so we've got a Discord server. I think that's going to be a little bit different because you're not, so there are a couple of things there. The first is that you're not going to have longitudinal relationships with people, right? So there's like other kinds of non-traditional support. So we've got community support. You can always post questions on Reddit and things like that. Like we'll try to get around to what we can, or other people will respond to you. We obviously have all of our Twitch streams and YouTube videos and things like that, which are completely free. So we recognize that not everyone can afford coaching. We also have a subsidy fund, which for people, so for example, for the past several months, like no one from Russia or Ukraine has had to pay $1. So we sort of recognize that sometimes people are in situations of hardship. We also have, so we recognize that people can't pay for stuff. So sometimes we'll actually find corporate sponsors for coaching spots. So we did a corporate sponsorship with Opera GX, for example, where they like agreed to pay for coaching packages for people in our community. So that's, for people who can't afford it, we've got some options there, but like we can't give it away for free because we pay our coaches. And then the other things are, there's a lot of other support in the community, and that's why we have things like a Discord server and stuff like that. I'm not saying that the two are equivalent. They're very different. So I think Discord can offer a lot of things that coaching actually can't offer, which is really fantastic. It can offer a place where people will get together and meditate every week. It can offer a place where people can get together and clean their room or set their sleep schedule or like, so it's awesome. Kind Supportive is asking, any plan to develop a continuing education program for clinicians? 100%. Thinking about it. Felreach is asking, how can we donate to the coaching fund? Y'all can just donate to the foundation. So, yeah, we don't, y'all can donate to the foundation. That's where we do some charitable stuff. But the other thing is that we will, how can I say this? We usually go to places like corporate sponsors for the support with the coaching fund, if that makes sense. How do you donate to Dr. K's Dota 2 fund? Maybe I'll. How about this? If I play Dota 2, y'all can donate next time. What is your goal for us? Ij What is your goal for us, Dr. K? My goal is for you to no longer need us. That's my goal. My goal is for you to leave. My goal is for you to have such a happy and fulfilling life that you're too busy during Dr. K's stream to show up. And I'd love it if you showed up occasionally and said hello and stayed in touch. But my goal is for you to like be off of Twitch, be off of YouTube. Go and live your life, man. And that sounds like I'm pushing you out the door. You can stay here as long as you want to. But if you honestly want to know what the goal is, it's to no longer need us. Seriously, right? That's the goal. Y'all are welcome to stay as long as you want to, but the goal here is not to stay. The goal of coming here is to actually leave. And what I realized a long time ago is like, in order to achieve that, I need to start teaching other people what I do. And that's where our coaching program was born. It's to help you build a life that's worth living. So Ace Sugawara is asking, coaches ask how you are, but no one asks how our coaches. Incorrect. We ask how our coaches. We have a lot of behind the scenes support for coaches. I'm the one who asks how our coaches. In fact, I will be asking how our coaches tomorrow at 4 p.m. Okay, let's do another post. Look at how far y'all are going. Who asks how Dr. K is doing? Y'all ask how Dr. K is doing. And thus completes the circle of life, sweet friends. Right? So the coaches ask y'all how y'all are doing. I ask the coaches how they're doing. And you ask me how I'm doing. Thus completes the circle of life. How am I today? I'm tired, but I'm really enjoying myself. And I'm reminded of why we started this. Like, we're going to do it, chat. We're going to do it. Y'all are going to build lives. They're going to be good. Y'all are going to have fun. There will be lots of affection between us and y'all in terms of the HG community. Y'all will love each other, and you will start building a life outside of us. You're going to figure out how you work. You're going to understand your mind. You're going to be patient with yourself. You're going to be compassionate with yourself. You're not going to beat yourself up for not knowing how to do it right. Did you make mistakes? Sure. Did you screw up? Absolutely. But let's remember that no one taught you the rules. And so it's really not fair for you to blame yourself for losing when you were never taught how to play the game. And so we're going to help you develop some positive self-talk, and you're going to pick yourself off the mat, and you're going to go back out there, and you're going to try, and you're going to fall face forward, flat, boom. And then you're going to come back to us, and you're going to post on our subreddit. You're going to hang out on our Discord. You're going to get your sleep schedule in order. You're going to sign up with a coach. You're going to get Dr. K's guide, whatever. And you're going to keep doing it until you figure out how. And then one day when you least expect it, you will discover randomly that you're happy and that life is actually pretty good. And you won't realize how you did it. Gaming Comics is saying, I hope Dr. K will be giving out hugs at the next TwitchCon. I hope so too. So, toxic cycles exist, but so do upward cycles. Like, I've seen it. There are times where you just start crushing it. And that's the thing, is like, we just need a little break, right? Like, you just need you need one thing to go your way, and you could turn it around. And that's where, that's why we try to help, because the truth is that if you think about putting together your life, right? Putting together your life is like 1,000 things. You don't need help with 1,000 things. You just need help with like 10. And if you can get 10 of those under control, you'll be a little bit less overwhelmed. You'll be a little bit more optimistic. You can do the next 20 yourself. And one thing that I've learned of, being a psychiatrist, being whatever, like monk in training, internet guru, call it whatever you want. Like, have faith in people, because people are like pretty legit. Like, they're capable of a lot, right? Human beings are actually really amazing. It's just, it takes so much to wear us down. And once we get worn down, everything feels so painful. It's so easy to lose sight of how capable you are just because you're running on empty. And all it takes is some gas. And then like your car, like moving a car on empty is so astronomically difficult. You got to push, put it in neutral and push. Get a little bit of gas and it's so much easier to move the car. And what happens is we get stuck on empty for so long, we like forget, and like we just need someone to like give us a refuel. We need someone to show up with like one gallon of gas or 2 liters of gas so that we can get to the next gas station and help ourselves. And that's what I hope this community will do. All right. We're going to do one more. Okay. Screw the idea that childhood is the best part of your life. First off, you are entitled to your happy childhood memories. This is more of a vent post. Every time I hear about how much fun it was to play D&D as a kid, the intensity of finally finding the courage to talk to their crush, hearing them laugh as they remember that relationship only lasted about a week, or about how bullying made them stronger, how they snuck out of the house as teenagers, about how their interests and dreams for the future were in constant flux. Seeing them smile as they reminisce about going to a party, dancing their ass off and noticing that their girlfriend was embarrassed. Every time I hear about how people would want to do it all again if they could, all I think of is that I really wouldn't. Not that I don't have good memories, but most of it really just sucked. School specifically, it was an environment where you were either part of the class or completely excluded by it. There was even bullying going on early on, though perhaps not as you would normally envision it. It wasn't a small group of people then, that came later, but the entire class that would hate on one individual. It was an environment that taught me to be extremely conscious about what I said and did, so as to not give people ammunition, while simultaneously not making an effort to make friends, because the less I could be part of that, the better. As people got older, I started to believe that I must somehow be fundamentally broken for no one to like me. I did somehow find friends occasionally, though, but unfortunately, I hadn't been taught much about conflict resolution. Combined with my newfound belief that there must be something wrong with me, so no one must like me, every disagreement felt as if they had finally seen through me, resulting in me pulling back into myself. I didn't realize it then that conflict doesn't have to end with me apologizing profusely, ignoring my own feelings and taking full responsibility, or ghosting as they probably hate me now. Perhaps if my own feelings of nervousness, fear, and anger when I started school had not been dismissed as me being whiny, I could have found someone to help me with my problems as I grew older. As it stood, I was left to draw my own conclusions. So since I had clearly driven these people away, I should try to act less like me and more like the people around me who have friends. Exaggerate the things about me that are likable, suppress the ones that are not. When I do find friends, I should always be talking about them, helping them out when they need it, whilst solving all of my own problems by myself. Strive for complete independence in all things. So friendships as a teenager were mostly surface level, and a lot of my life was just kind of dull. Again, there were highlights. More than before, and ironically, mostly when I let the mask slip was more authentic to myself. But a lot of teenage life just was really boring and uneventful. All that to say, if it was possible, I would never go back in time just to live it all again. Perhaps to change things or to get more time to live and learn the lessons that people learned as kids and teenagers that I'm currently learning for myself. So childhood sometimes suck, as can teenage years. I hope that even if childhood might be the best part of other people's lives, it doesn't have to be the best part of mine. So we have this idea that childhood is supposed to be the best part of our life. But for a lot of people, for too many people, we don't have warm, glowing memories about childhood. The truth is, childhood was hard. We were sort of thrust into the world without adequate training or education. We skipped past the tutorial, and we just got bodied by life. It wasn't a small group of bullies that picked on you. It was the whole class, because the class likes to make fun of one kid, and some of us are that one kid. And then that shapes our perception of ourselves. We start to learn how to survive, where communication becomes giving up ammunition. So we withdraw into ourself. As we withdraw into ourself, we don't develop social skills. We miss milestones. And then what happens is we don't learn basic things like conflict resolution. And so there are opportunities for friendship. There are opportunities for connection. But since we miss these milestones, we end up learning lessons like conflict has to end with me apologizing profusely, ignoring your own feelings, and taking full responsibility. And then what we end up doing is cultivating relationships where it's always our fault and never theirs. We become doormats. And then what we end up doing is, since other people are right and I'm wrong, you discover that, oh, okay, like there are people out there who are narcissistic who will be my friend if I let them, if I don't advocate for myself. And you'll find a lot of friends, right? So if I'm lonely and I don't have friends, a really easy way to find something that looks and feels like friendship, because truth be told, you may not even know, right? Is when you do things for other people, when you help people out, when you're always the friend who will help them move. But you don't know how to ask for help yourself. Striving for complete independence within yourself while fostering complete dependence for the people around you. You're the friend that's always there for them, even if they're never there for you. And you feel frustrated by that, but that too is something that you don't know how to even ask for help sometimes, right? Because a long time ago, remember that like opening up to people and being authentic is giving them ammunition. So you learn to exaggerate the things about you that are likable, suppress the things that are not. And by the way, a friend who needs help is something that is not fun, right? If you're crying and upset about being lonely and stuff like that's not a good look. And so we sort of end up in this kind of situation, like as an adult sometimes, where we're kind of looking back on our childhood and actually saying to ourselves, you know what? Childhood for me sucked. But that's kind of tricky because there are a lot of other people out there who say childhood is the best time of our life. Oh my God, it's the best years of your life. Enjoy them. Everyone says that, right? So let's think about that for a second. Let's try to understand, what does that mean for you logically if your childhood wasn't good? What it means is that you're screwed, right? So let's just think about this. So if the childhood is the best years of your life, and then as you get older, things get worse. So like this is the best that life has to offer. It's your childhood, right? And then your young adulthood, old age, then you're sick and you get cancer and all that bad stuff. This is the best part of life. But you start over here because your childhood wasn't good. Your childhood sucked. And so what that sort of means is as time gets older, like this is as high as you can go because everyone says this is the best and you missed out on that. So it's almost as if you were not given the opportunity for a complete and happy life. Because if these are the best years of your life and those years were bad for you, that's like that opportunity is gone. That ship has sailed. It's like starting a class with the highest grade that you can get as a B. You missed out on the A. The A is like not even a possibility because everyone says that the A happens in childhood. And since you didn't get that, since you missed out on the best opportunity that life has to offer, you will never have as good of a life as everyone else. This is what it means, right? Because if childhood years are the best years and you missed out on those, you've missed out on the best of life. You're going into the game having missed out on the best part. It's devastating. So like, what do you do about that, right? It's kind of like, that sucks. So there are a couple of really important things to understand. The first is, what does best mean? So like, what does that mean, best? So a lot of people appreciate childhood, first of all, because our brains, let's understand why people appreciate childhood. First is that our brains have bad memories. Like think about, how much do you remember about being 8? How much do you remember about being 9? How much do you remember about being 12 or 7? Like, do you remember what it was like to be you 2 years ago versus 10 years ago versus 15 years ago? So the first reason that we tend to come to the conclusion that childhood is the best years of our lives is because our memory sucks. So we tend to romanticize things. We tend to have powerful emotional experiences which define our childhood. So this goes back to Vedic psychology. If y'all have seen, our lecture on this, we've done streams about it. We've done YouTube about it. It's in Dr. K's guide very succinctly. So if you need like a comprehensive resource, that's the best place to find it. But you can find it on our YouTube channel as well. But this is the kind of thing where like you have that emotional impression, which does not get digested. So anytime you experience an emotion, that emotion gets somewhat digested. And then whatever doesn't get digested gets deposited and gets stored. And what digests emotion? Generally speaking, the adult mind gets better at digesting emotion. So if you think about emotional processing, a 5-year-old doesn't know how to emotionally process. A 10-year-old may know how to emotionally process a little bit better. A 20-year-old may know a little bit more emotional processing. And by the time you're 35, you're hopefully decent at it. And that's why you can be a parent to someone else. So you help them emotionally process. Therapists will help you emotionally process, right? So you can help out. But here's the thing, as a kid, you can't really emotionally process very well. So what that means is that a lot of emotions get stored down and then they get recalled. So you don't remember, you just remember this epic birthday party where everything was a blast, but you don't remember, you have these vague like emotional impressions that are tied to like almost pictures of memories. They're not a full memory where you remember what was said and what was done and what everyone was wearing. You just have these like impressions, right? That's what memory is like. It's like this impression that has a powerful and emotional experience. You remember the first time that you had a crush. You remember exactly what they looked like, but you don't remember what you had for lunch that day, or maybe you do. Maybe it's very vivid in one particular day. So we tend to romanticize childhood. And part of the reason we romanticize childhood is if you had a good childhood, then there are all these positive emotional impressions. And when you think about this being the best time of your life, what you really remember is those positive emotional impressions, because that's what really all you can remember. So childhood in that way isn't really the best time of our life. It's just we remember it in a particular way that makes it appear the best because of the way that our memory works. There are other features about childhood that make it better. So one is that generally speaking, we don't have responsibilities. Right? Like you're free and things are new. So like as a child, things are novel. You can enjoy things more. You have less responsibility. There's like less. So as we talked about earlier, over time, we form core beliefs. We form ways of looking at the world. We can become cynical and doubtful and scared. And so once we start thinking that way, life becomes less fun. So as a child, like what's so awesome about childhood, we've got a clean slate. So experiences are like novel and interesting, and we're not quite as cynical. Any kid you meet at the playground could be a friend. They're not judging you for the way that you look. So after you have lots of experiences and you start to learn these things about yourself, you start to form beliefs about yourself, you have an outlook on life, that negatively impacts the way that you live life. Children are also incredibly present. Right? They don't really think too much about the past, and they don't really think too much about the future. And so when we put these things together, we put together like the way that your memories are formed, like how we romanticize our childhood. We put together things like a present focus, novelty, and a lack of like cynical outlook. We can see why childhood, a lot of people say that childhood is the best time of their life. So if you had a crappy childhood, does that mean that you've basically missed the boat on having a good life? Your amount of happiness is going to be capped at 80% because you missed that sweet, sweet, upper level happiness, that high quality, top-notch happiness of childhood. That's how it can feel. Thankfully, the answer is no. That's not the case at all. So some of us, I mean, I didn't grow up this way, but some of y'all, I suppose, some of us, have crappy childhoods. We have childhoods that are filled with toxicity. We have childhoods that are filled with judgment. We have childhoods that are filled with being rudderless. Right? Like as we're navigating problems in childhood, like if there aren't people there to help us and support us, we don't have the capability to help ourselves as children. So if you're in a bad environment, like you just don't have the capability to try to affect change in your life. And so all you do is you get screwed. You get bodied. You get beat up. You get pushed around. You get knocked back and forth by life. Because you're a kid and you don't know what to do. Like you don't know how to like stand up for yourself. No one taught you how to stand up for yourself. And in the worst case scenarios, you started to believe that you didn't deserve to stand up for yourself. And if that's your childhood, what does that mean? Does that mean that your life is just not going to be as fun? I completely disagree. So I think there are two kinds of childhood. One childhood is where you peak, and the other childhood is where you trough. So for some people, childhood is the low point in their life, and life just gets better. And for some people, they feel like childhood is the best part of their life, and it, generally speaking, goes downhill, or they feel that way. But that too is a cynical impression, right? So that's something they carry with them. So we'll get to that in a second. So some people that I have worked with that grew up in toxic households. And what I've experienced with those people is that childhood, it's only uphill from childhood in terms of quality. So this is where if you're growing up in a place where you had a toxic childhood and you kind of feel like screwed out of life, there's good news, which is that it like gets better and time is on your side. So I'll give you all just a simple example. So I was working with someone who was not heterosexual and grew up in a relatively toxic household where people were unaccepting of who they were. And so the problem is that they grew up in a small community where they don't control like where they go to school. They don't control who their parents are. They don't control like where they spend their time. Like they don't control anything in their life. So they just get knocked around with life. The good news is that as they grew older, they get more power to shape their life. If you've had a bad childhood, chances are it's because you lacked power, right? Like that's all kids lack power. And the difference is that if you lack power and your surroundings are positive, that doesn't matter because people are watching out for you. But if you lack power and no one is looking out for you, then you're in trouble. So the good news, though, is that every year that goes by, every year that this person grows up, they get a little bit more power over their life. They go away to college. They have more latitude. Parents aren't looking over their shoulder. They can explore their identity. They can meet other people. They can start to shape who surrounds them. That's a huge part of a crappy childhood. It's like you don't get to control who's at school. Like you have to go to school. You don't get to set limits on people. You can't limit contact with someone at school. You just can't do that. And so every year that goes by, you can shape your life more in the positive direction. You can find a positive relationship. You can work with professional colleagues who respect you for who you are. You can start to build a family of your own. And so if you've missed out on a happy childhood, it's going to take work, but you can absolutely be happy and you can even build a life that is like phenomenal. And I've seen this happen time and time and time again. So that's the first thing is like, if you've had a toxic childhood, kind of sucks for you. And every year that goes by, you can exercise more and more power to build the life that you want to. The next thing to remember is as we looked at and understood why childhood is so special, you can start to cultivate those things in your life today. So you could start to be more present focused and you will literally increase in happiness. There are numerous studies about this. What is anxiety? Anxiety is worrying in the future. Anxiety is future focused. This is in Dr. K's guide too. Like you can't have anxiety about the past. People may think they have anxiety about the past, but it's technically impossible. There may have been an event in the past that you're anxious about the consequences of in the future, but anxiety is future focused. It's about things that have not happened yet. Regret is of the past. You can't regret anything in the present. You can only regret in the past actions. So joy is found in the present. That's what kids don't have a conception. Their brains literally cannot, their frontal lobes are underdeveloped. So their ability to anticipate things in the future is like not developed neuroscientifically, which is why they live in the present. So as we train ourselves to live more in the present, we can reclaim some of the happiness of childhood. So there's all kinds of different stuff that we can do to sort of become happier in the present and be more childlike. Another thing that happens is novelty. So this is something that adults do. Adults don't engage in new stuff anymore. And so if you start engaging in new stuff, you can capture a piece of that childhood happiness. You know, a good example of this is something like, I don't know about people's dietary restrictions and stuff like that, but like eat a strange food. So I was probably in my 20s the first time I tried an oyster. Not a huge fan, but it was definitely an experience. Right? Like you can try new stuff, but we don't do that. And part of the reason we don't do that is because most of our experiences with new things are not things that we seek. They're things that happen to us when we're kids. When we're kids, we're like, you know, our parents are like, here, try this food. All of the novelty in life, we're trained as children that novelty is handed to us on a silver platter. Literally in the case of oysters. Right? So like you can become more childlike. You can get some of the joy of childhood, but you have to learn how to seek novelty. The third thing that you can do to become more childlike or be happy as an adult is be aware of your like cynicism in the way that you view life. Because as you start to view life with more and more expectations, it tanks your happiness. And a big part of the happiness of childhood is actually like being expectation free. Right? So I had 3 months of summer and like I didn't know what I was going to do. And I was actually like pretty bored, but man, it was a blast. So be free of expectation. And the more that you cultivate, like, be careful about your attitudes, like prune some parts of the attitudes that you have. And as you start focusing on your attitude and mindset, like, life will become more fun. So if you're someone who's sort of fallen into this idea, like you hear this thing that, okay, childhood is the best, being a kid is the most fun you'll ever have. And everyone says it, right? A lot of people say it. And then you're kind of there scratching your head and you're sort of thinking, like, my childhood wasn't great. Does that mean that I'm basically screwed? Does that mean that the capacity for happiness in my life has been like the limit on that, the ceiling on that has been like brought down? Because that's what it sounds like, right? Because everyone says happiness is the best years of your life. And childhood was the best years of your life. And if you don't have a good childhood, that means that you're not going to have a great life. And if that's the case, then you're kind of like, well, does that mean I'm screwed? No, actually, no. So there's a different kind of life where childhood is actually the worst. And every year that goes by, as you become more empowered to craft the life that you want to. Do you want to go on vacation? Do you want to stay up till 2 a.m.? Do you want to stay up till 6 a.m.? Do you want to eat cookies for breakfast? Do you want to have donuts for dinner? You can do all those things as an adult. And then there are a couple of actual attributes of childhood that we need to keep in mind. Present focused is number one. Second thing is like how we're cynical, how we start to form expectations of the world. And those expectations take the glow and brightness away from the world. And so as we start to dismantle those and really understand like how we believe what we believe, we can become more childlike. So expectations and cynicism, got to do away with that. Be present focused and seek novelty. Because the whole thing is that novelty is given to us, right? Even if you think about playing a new game, sometimes we'll go hunting for a new game, but most of the new games we play about are things that like get presented to us. So we see advertisements for it, or, there's a sponsored stream somewhere, or like whatever, right? So we don't go seeking new experiences. But if you seek new experiences, live in the present, and let go of expectations, you're going to have an amazing life. And by the way, being an adult is pretty great for a lot of reasons, right? Like you get to eat what you want to, when you want to. You're a little bit more responsible, which is tricky, but So if you've had a bad childhood, it doesn't mean that your capacity for happiness in this world has been artificially limited. Don't worry, you can absolutely get there. And it's absolutely worth it. What was my recent novelty? So many things. Yeah, so many things, man. So I think that's where novelty can also be based on attitude. So like, everything is new. Like even this glass of water, I've never had this glass of water before today. So this experience can be novel. So you can sort of like, there can be things that you've done before that can be novel. That's why playing, MOBAs is fun, because you've done it 1,000 times before. But this next one could be different, right? You look at that? So there's a lot of novelty out there. What do you think of the show Arcane? I think it's fantastic. Warm lava. So there's a question, Zelector is asking, how can I not constantly think of the negative thoughts that I keep having? So there's actually multiple videos about this in Dr. K's Guide to ADHD and Doing Stuff. So here's the key tip. If y'all are struggling to not think something, let's run. This is going to be our meditation for the day, okay? So we're going to run through some Q&A. So I want y'all to notice this. Where do thoughts come from? So let's think about like the last game that you played. Where did you first Let's think about a game that you're excited about. Were people 1,000 years ago excited about the game that you're excited about? Let's say Starfield. Who here is ready to be disappointed? Right? So why is that? So where does the excitement of Starfield come from? Right? So it comes from, well, so people, no, I mean, literally, when did you first get excited about Starfield? Or if you're excited now, like where did that seeing it? Excellent. Our perception. So let's even think about that. So if the Starfield announcement had been, hello, we're here at Bethesda, we've made a game, it's called Starfield. It's like Skyrim, but it's in space. And we're going to re-release it a few times. It's going to be great. We wanted to do Skyrim in space. That's Starfield. Is that more exciting and get you thinking about it more, or less exciting than what they actually did? What do y'all think? Okay, I'm getting trolled. But generally speaking, what gets y'all hyped up about stuff? Right? So the amount of sensory involvement correlates with the amount of thought and hype. Y'all get that? So like, if you look at a trailer, like a trailer isn't black and white, it's in color. A trailer has music. It's sensorily very engaging. And the more hype it is, so let's like think about what is hype? What does hype even mean? Hype means that a lot of people are thinking about it. That's what hype is. I'm thinking about it. You're thinking about it. We're going to talk about it. And as we create hype in two minds and we start conversing, what are we doing? We're enhancing our sensory input because now I'm hearing about it from you. So thoughts in the mind fundamentally come from sensory input. So what I want y'all to do is if there is a thought in your mind that you want to cultivate, I want you to think about what kind of sensory input gets that thought to pop in your mind more. If there's a thought in your mind that you don't want, what kind of sensory input triggers that thought? Hi, Alok beta, when are you getting married, beta? When are you getting married? Are you married yet? I found this girl for you. She's great. She's from India. She's very nice. Her name is Riddhi. She's very good, very family girl. Right? And then like, what happens in my mind when I hear that? I'm like, oh my God, like I'm going to be alone forever. Like, Jesus, I don't want to marry someone from India named Riddhi. Right? Like, so sensory input is crucial. So if y'all want to control your thoughts, I want y'all to do this exercise. One is think about a thought that you want to cultivate and what kind of sensory input cultivates that thought. And think about one kind of thought that you don't want to cultivate, that you want to wither and die, and think about what triggers that thought from the outside. And then what you can do is instead of trying to wrestle with your mind, what you can do is actually just create the right triggers. So even something like an alarm is a great example for this. So if I set an alarm that I need to, go to the airport at 5, if I need to leave for the airport at 5 p.m., and I set an alarm for 5 p.m., when I hear the alarm go off, what happens in my mind? It literally creates a thought, time to go to the airport. I was not thinking about going to the airport until I heard the sensory anchor of the alarm. It's that simple. The thing is, we don't realize that all of our thoughts, not all, but the majority of our thoughts are coming from our sensory impressions. And you may say, well, like laying at bed at night, like I'm thinking about, my anxiety gets the better of me. So it can also be from the memories of sensory impressions. But that's where I just start to cultivate, like look at yourself and look at where thoughts come from. And I know that sounds weird because it's like, is that a meditation? Yeah, that's actually like the most core meditation there is to look in yourself and see where thoughts come from. Okay. So does this work if I have a song stuck in my head? So let me ask you, Dr. Levy, what had to happen for you to get the song stuck in your head? Can you get a song stuck in your head without hearing it? Right? It's that simple. So if you have a persistent thought, like, where did it come from? It doesn't matter whether it's this is what y'all have to understand. This is like literally how the mind works. This is not just about music. It's like literally how the mind works. Where do thoughts come from? People in advertising rely on it. People make up catchy tunes. Why? Why are jingles so important for advertising? So it gets lodged in your mind and you can't dismantle it. Y'all get that? Like, people use this principle on you all the time. So start to use it for yourself. If you want a particular thought, think about what triggered the thought. And if you want to get rid of a particular thought, think about what triggered the thought. And then shape your environment to reduce the wrong thoughts and increase the right thoughts. And then as you start to think the right thoughts, as you spend less time playing video games and more time working with your friends who are like, want to make a board game, you're going to start like thinking about the board game, building the board game, writing the backstory, doing some world building. And at the end of the week, you will have spent 8 hours working on a board game instead of 8 hours playing a video game. And then your life will start to move in the right direction. All right, we're going to do one more really quick just because we wanted to get to this. How do I come out to my therapist? I live in a very not so accepting, heavily religious country, and I feel like I can't trust people with this information, even a therapist. I trust my therapist with a lot, but I'm still afraid that they're going to out me with my parents, and that is truly a terrifying thought. I've been wondering about it, and I think it would help my case because I feel like a lot of my problems also stem from my sexuality, but I just don't know how to tell if I can trust them with this. So the trickiest thing about sometimes being in therapy is that therapy is a place where we have to be very careful what we say, which is kind of silly because therapy is supposed to be the place where we can say whatever we want to without being burdened by the consequences. But I've seen this a lot as a psychiatrist, where patients will come into my office and will try really hard to tell me they're suicidal without telling me that they're suicidal. Because if they tell me that they're suicidal because of medical legal reasons, I'm going to have them hospitalized. Because a lot of therapists, we have protocols, right? Where it's like, oh, like you have to assess for suicidal ideation. You have to assess for suicidal ideation. A lot of times providers, it's very hard to sit with the possibility of suicidality. So that's something that we're trained to do, right? So like you can't hospitalize everyone who has a suicidal thought. That's just not feasible. And it's not helpful, by the way. So the criteria for hospitalization are things like imminent risk. Chronically elevated risk is a completely different thing. So there's nothing special about today. It's like if you've had suicidal thoughts every day for the last 3 years, like hospitalizing you today may not help at all. But as a patient, you're terrified, right? Because maybe that's happened to you in the past, where clinicians didn't pay attention to what you were saying, and they just heard these magic words, which set them off on a track. And then they stopped listening to you. Right? And so sometimes what you have to do in therapy is hide from someone who's really good at seeing through BS and is knows you really well. And sometimes you're in a situation like this where your therapist, you're concerned that your privacy is not going to be kept safe. They may have values or religious beliefs that they'll project upon you, so you can't be yourself. So the tricky thing is that sometimes in therapy is when we actually have to hide the most. We also see this sometimes, it's kind of sad, but sometimes patients respect their therapists. And in turn, they want the respect of their therapists. Because my therapist is such a good person. They care about me so much. They try so hard to help me. And stupid old me can't be helped. And I can't bear to see the disappointment. They try so hard. They've worked with me so much, and I'm just not getting better. And so I have to pretend to be better so as to not disappoint my therapist. Seen that too. So it's tricky because sometimes like this one person that we're supposed to be able to trust with all of our secrets, all of our worries, all of our fears, can be the hardest person to confide in. So what do you do about it? So this is where I'm going to give you all, so this is where like, I could go the route of, I'm sorry you're in this situation, and be very like empathic and stuff. And I genuinely am. Like, I think it's really sad that we live in a world where we know that there are scientifically validated forms of helping another human being in terms of like emotionally and like helping them understand themselves. Like, we know this through research. And we have large parts of the world where like people don't do that, right? Where cultural influences, religious influences trump what we know to be clinically effective. We know basically what a lot of the right answers are in terms of patient autonomy, meeting people where they're at. But sometimes we have people in our community who come from these places where we can sort of say, go see a therapist, right? I say at the beginning of every stream, if you have a concern or question, but sometimes it's the therapist that you get. So what can you do about this as a patient? So there are a couple of things. They're basically going to revolve around asking your therapist about a couple of these things. So this is where if you're, let's say, gay and you're growing up in a place that has religious restrictions against that or judgments, how do you navigate telling this part of yourself to someone who may not accept it? So this is where, remember that coming out of the closet or even being gay is not binary, right? So we sort of think about it as binary, like, oh, are you in the closet or are you out of the closet? Like, they're just two modes. But the truth of the matter is that if you really look at people's experiences of coming out in terms of sharing their sexuality, like, it doesn't happen in a binary way, right? First, you tell particular people, maybe you start with a romantic partner, right? Obviously. And then like you tell your close friends, sometimes you come out to your family, you come out to your friends, you come out to your dog, like whatever. So it's actually a gradual process that has a lot more nuance to it. That's been my experience anyway, in terms of working with people, is that you don't have to come out all at once. You can sort of like do it in a graded manner, right? So what I would do is in that way, sort of ask the therapist a couple of questions. So you don't have to come out and say, hey, I'm gay. You can ask them questions like, what is your understanding of, like, what do you think about like homosexuality or like homosexual thoughts or whatever? Like, what do you think about being gay, being lesbian? How do you understand that phenomenon as a thing? So you can sort of just ask them what they think about it, right? So you don't have to, if you're afraid that they're going to tell your parents, you don't have to tell them that you're gay. You can just ask them what they think about it. Now, they may start to ask you questions like, why are you asking so much about what I think about being gay? And that's where you can also like, so that's like the first thing is you can just ask them what they think about it. You could sort of get a sense of whether this is safe or not. Next thing that you can do is you can share with them that you have particular thoughts, right? So if you're concerned about them labeling you as gay, treating you as a particular way, and, as an acknowledgement, like, I think it's sad that you have to do this. I think it's like concerning that you have to worry about ethical violations and stuff like that. This is really not okay. But the truth of the matter is that some of us are in situations that are not okay. And that situation is a reality. And sort of like shaking our fists at the world and saying, oh, like, this is so unfair. Like, yeah, it's unfair and it's sad that you're in that situation, but you've still got to like do something, right? Shaking your fist at the world and saying that, oh, I live in a country that's not accepting of gender fluidity or sexual fluidity is like, yeah, it's sad, but like, we've got to help you figure out what you're actually going to do about it. So next thing that you can do is even kind of point out to your therapist that sort of like sometimes you have these kinds of thoughts, like, what do they think about that? How do they understand? Why do people have these thoughts? And that's where like, hopefully your therapist will say one of two things. I mean, hopefully they say one thing, but they could say one of two directions, right? One is that some people are gay and that's just how it is. It's completely okay. And if they say that, then you're good, hopefully. The other thing they'll say is, oh yeah, it's like an abomination against God. And so those thoughts need to be dealt with. The interesting thing is that either way, you can even go one step further. And you can say that I believe that a lot of my problems stem from these thoughts. I'm wondering whether there's a relationship between some of the thoughts that I have and some of the problems that I have. And so you don't have to come out as gay. You don't even have to embrace it. You can just point out, as you've done, that some of my challenges come from having these thoughts. And then y'all can work through, hopefully, that without sort of like owning and coming out of the closet entirely if it's not safe to do. So that's where I would even hope that there's a way to like work on some of these problems even without coming out entirely to your therapist. Now, that's going to feel bad in some ways. It's going to feel really sad too. It's unfortunate that you have to do these shenanigans, right? Because you're supposed to be able to trust your therapist. But that's where, like, even as a therapist, if I'm judging something and a client comes to me or patient comes to me and says, I want to work on this thing, I can still work on them without, I don't know how to say this, without like letting the judgment kind of get in the way. So if someone comes to me and, has a particular problem that I judge, if they say that, hey, I think this is like a concern that I have and it's affecting my life in these ways, can we work on that? I'd say yes, right? It's like, that's what we're supposed to do as therapists. So I think there's even a way to frame it where if you kind of point out that I'm wondering whether these thoughts, and I think that language can actually be really helpful because it doesn't actually involve coming out and expose you to that risk. Now, it's super sad that you have to frame it that way instead of being able to own your identity. Like, that's really unfortunate. It's a tragedy. But if that's the world that you live in, I think survival first, right? And like, so I'd say you can start by sort of asking your therapist, if you're concerned about your therapist judging you, you can ask them about the topic is not related to you. What do you think about this thing? Next thing that you can do is you can share with them that you're sort of like having some of these thoughts and like, what do they think about that? How should we handle that? And third thing that you can do is if they're tied to particular other challenges that you face, which is very common, then can we work on the connection between these two things and at least be able to talk about some aspects of sexuality as it relates to these problems without coming out to your therapist and exposing yourself to a bunch of risk? Because this is an issue of safety and vulnerability. The other simple questions that you can ask is, how confidential are these sessions? So is there any chance that, you sort of have to ask, would you ever disclose anything to my parents? Have you disclosed anything to my parents? Under what circumstances would you disclose things to my parents? And that's where hopefully they're honest with you and hopefully you trust them and they're kind of straightforward with you. But there are absolutely cases where, therapists exist within a community where they will violate confidentiality for the sake of like community stuff, which I think is absolutely an ethical mistake. But it does happen. And you can't really, if you're someone, it can be super challenging to be, not heterosexual in certain parts of the world. And so like, I think you've got to behave in sort of a safe manner. And hopefully these are a couple of things that you can sort of try to like test the waters with your therapist. And that's essentially what I would recommend is like, you got to see how they are. And then over time, you can also ask, you can find a different therapist. It sounds like you trust this person a lot. So I'd start by actually having a conversation with them a little bit about some of these ideas. So hopefully that'll help. Are therapists legally allowed to lie about telling anyone about the sessions? I don't know about legally. That involves because different countries have different laws, different states have different laws. But it's generally speaking unethical to do so. All right, who are we rating? And by the way, the therapist thing, you can also do that in terms of suicidality or something too. You can ask your therapist, like, so what, if I tell you that I have suicidal thoughts, like, what's your process in dealing with that? How often do you hospitalize people for suicidality? We can raid Casey Tron. Are the 7 chakras a Western invention? Is chakra meditation in the guide? So 7 chakras are not a Western invention. They're an Eastern invention. And there are chakra meditations in many of the guides. So I know that the depression guide, for example, has a Anahat chakra meditation, or maybe the meditation guide does. We have Vishuddha chakra and Manipura chakra meditations coming out in the next guide. So this is a meditation specifically for people who have emotional blocks to motivation. So not just digesting emotions, but specifically if your emotions are getting in the way of you moving in the direction that you want to and taking a particular action. Like I need to tell my professor that I need to ask my professor for an extension, but I'm afraid they're going to say no. That's a good example. There's actually a particular practice which we teach in the next guide, which has Vishuddha and Manipura chakra kind of connections. So it facilitates clearing of blockages of emotions to take action. We'll raid Casey Tron. All right, let's send some love to Casey Tron. We'll see y'all hopefully on Friday. And yeah, so take care, everybody, and love y'all.